Hey there, tonight we're exploring the brutal lives of the Mongol Nomads. Far from the Hollywood tales of endless conquest, the truth is a harsh reality of survival against unforgiving terrains and relentless elements. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. Your life in the Mongol steppes is one wild ride. The moment you open your eyes, you're greeted not by the gentle glow of a sunrise, but by the biting wind that seems to have its own vendetta against exposed skin. The temperature outside, well, let's just say it's the kind of cold that makes you question your life choices. But that's just another day in the life of a Mongol nomad. Your home is a around, collapsible structure that can be packed up and moved faster than you can say, nomadic lifestyle. Think of it as the IKEA of the medieval world, efficient, practical, and occasionally infuriating to set up. This is your fortress against the brutal climate, but it's also a constant reminder of your transient existence. It's made of felt and wood, a combination that offers surprising warmth and the ability to withstand the relentless winds of the steppe. You might curse its flimsiness when the wind howls, but you also know it's the reason you can survive here in the first place. Now, let's not sugarcoat the realities of this life. The Mongol steppes aren't exactly a five-star resort. With temperatures plummeting below -30 degrees C in winter and soaring to 40 degrees C in summer, it's clear Mother Nature didn't really have comfort in mind. And your neighbors? Well, they might not be next door, but the threat of rival tribes is always lurking. You're constantly aware that while you might share a similar lifestyle, everyone is vying for the same scarce resources. Speaking of resources, let's talk about your trusty steed. Horses are more than just transportation, they're your lifeline. Without them, your nomadic existence would come to a screeching halt. You don't just ride them, you rely on them for milk, meat, and even as companions. In fact, Mongols are known to have up to 3 or 4 horses per person. When you're not riding them, you're taking care of them, ensuring they're healthy and ready for the next move. But let's dive deeper. You see, this way of life isn't just a survival tactic, it's an art form. Your skills as a horseman are unrivaled, honed from a young age. By the time you're 5, you're already trotting around on horseback, learning the ropes of herding and riding with the kind of balance that would put any circus performer to shame. Archery practice is as much a part of your daily routine as eating, because let's face it, the ability to shoot an arrow while galloping at full speed is not just cool, it's essential for survival. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Despite the harsh conditions, the Mongol nomads don't just survive, they thrive. Their adaptability is legendary, and their ability to move quickly across vast distances gives them an edge in warfare and trade alike. You might think of the Mongols as fierce warriors, but they're also savvy traders, exchanging goods and ideas along the Silk Road. This network of trade routes stretches over 4,000 miles and connects them to the riches of both the East and the West. Of course, the romance of the nomadic life is often punctuated by stark realities. Herding livestock is your main gig, and it's no walk in the park. You've got sheep, goats, and camels to worry about, each requiring careful management. Losing a few animals to harsh weather or predators can mean the difference between feast and famine. And then there's the constant challenge of finding fresh grazing land, which keeps you moving and always on edge. Yet, in this harsh existence, there's a strange sense of freedom. You're not tied down to one place, and your life isn't dictated by the whims of a ruler or the rigid structures of a city. You answer to the open sky and the call of the wind, and while that might sound poetic, it's also a hefty responsibility. With each season, you're reminded of the delicate balance between man and nature, a dance as old as time itself. As you navigate this brutal, beautiful world, you embrace the culture and traditions that have been passed down through generations. The stories told around the fire are as much about history as they are about survival. You learn from the triumphs and failures of your ancestors, understanding that their legacy is not just in the land you traverse, but in the resilience you carry within. So, as you sit by the fire, warming your hands, and sharing tales of daring raids or successful hunts, remember that being a Mongol nomad is not just about enduring the harsh realities. It's about thriving in spite of them, finding strength in the community, and harnessing the spirit of the land that shapes you. As the warmth of the fire flickers in the cold night, you can't help but think that these tales of daring raids and successful hunts have more than just a dash of Hollywood flair. Sure, everyone loves a good story of heroism and adventure, but the Mongol way of life wasn't just about galloping off heroically into the sunset with loot and glory. It was an economic engine as precise as a Swiss watch, driven by necessity and a touch of cunning genius. Let's get one thing straight. The Mongols were not your run-of-the-mill marauders. Forget the image of indiscriminate pillaging. These folks were strategic, deliberate, and dare I say, efficient. Raiding wasn't just about the thrill of the chase. It was a calculated business move. In the harsh realities of the steppe, where resources were as scarce as a snowflake in July, raiding was a way to acquire what you couldn't produce yourself. And boy, did the Mongols have a knack for acquiring the good stuff. Picture this. It's the early 13th century, and the Mongol Empire is just starting to stretch its legs. Genghis Khan, the great unifier, is at the helm, and he's not just interested in expanding territory for the sake of having more land to roam. No, he's got a keen eye on the economic potential of his conquests. When the Mongols set their sights on a target, they weren't just after gold and jewels. They were after silk, spices, skilled artisans, and most importantly, knowledge. These weren't just trophies to show off. They were assets to be leveraged in building an empire. Take the Silk Road, that legendary network of trade routes that connected east to west like a medieval highway. The Mongols didn't just plunder it, they safeguarded it. Under their rule, the Silk Road thrived, becoming a bustling artery of commerce. They understood that a happy merchant is a profitable merchant, and they knew how to keep their traders content by offering protection and ensuring safe passage through their vast domains. It was less about breaking things and more about, well, making things work. Genghis Khan even established a postal system called the Yam, which was basically the Amazon Prime of the medieval world, ensuring swift communication across his empire. Now, don't get me wrong, the Mongols weren't above a good old-fashioned raid, but these were often executed with the precision of a military campaign rather than a looter's frenzy. Their targets were carefully chosen, rich cities with poor defenses or strategic locations that could offer long-term benefits. And once they had what they needed, they didn't hang around to gloat. They packed up, moved on, and planned the next strategic acquisition. Speaking of moving on, let's talk logistics. Ever tried packing for a move? Now imagine moving an entire community, people, livestock, jurs, and all, across hundreds of miles of unforgiving terrain. It's like a game of three-dimensional chess played on horseback, and the Mongols were grandmasters. The secret sauce: mobility and adaptability. With their lightweight jurs and sturdy horses, they could relocate at a moment's notice, following the grazing patterns of their herds or the shifting alliances of steppe politics. The Mongols didn't just pack up and hit the road without a plan, though. They had a keen sense of geography and an uncanny ability to read the land. Each migration was a calculated move, optimizing for resources and strategic advantage. They followed ancient routes that maximized access to water and grazing lands, minimizing the risk of running into hostile neighbors. And let's not forget the human element. Moving wasn't just about logistics. It was about maintaining the social fabric of the tribe. Each member had a role to play, from the youngest child to the oldest elder. It was a communal effort, and everyone pulled their weight. There was a sense of shared purpose that kept the wheels turning, a recognition that survival depended on cooperation and mutual support. So next time you hear tales of Mongol raids and conquests, remember the bigger picture. Theirs was a lifestyle dictated by the harsh realities of the steppe, yes, but it was also a sophisticated economic system that turned the spoils of war into the seeds of prosperity. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving, using every tool at their disposal to build an empire that would leave an indelible mark on history. And as you sit there, contemplating the complexities of the Mongol economic machine, you might find a strange sense of admiration for their ingenuity. It's a reminder that history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about people finding ways to turn adversity into opportunity. As the fire crackles and the stories continue, you realize that the legacy of the Mongols isn't just in the lands they conquered or the battles they won. It's in the way they redefined what it meant to live and thrive in a world that was as unforgiving as it was beautiful. But don't get too comfortable by the fire. There's more to this story, and it's not just about raids and trade routes. Soon, we'll delve into the cultural exchanges that these economic endeavors facilitated and the impact they had on shaping the Mongol Empire. Stay tuned, because this saga is far from over. As the fire dances in the chill of the Mongolian night, and you're contemplating the empire that seemed to grow from the very dust of the steppes, let's pivot to the political engine driving this formidable force. Because let's face it, the Mongol Empire wasn't just a ragtag band of horsemen led by a charismatic leader. Oh no, this was a well-oiled machine held together by intricate social and political structures that would make any modern corporate ladder look like a wobbly step stool. At the heart of this empire was the Khan, the leader, the big cheese. In our case, the most famous of them all, Genghis Khan, known in his own time as Temujin. Genghis wasn't just some guy with a cool title. He was the linchpin of Mongol society. His job was more than just leading raids or expanding territories. He was the ultimate diplomat, strategist, and perhaps most importantly, the glue holding the complex web of Mongol tribes together. You might think of him as the Jeff Bezos of the steppe, if Bezos commanded an army of fierce horsemen instead of a fleet of delivery vans. But what truly set Genghis apart wasn't just his military genius. It was his ability to unite the diverse Mongol tribes under a single banner. Before his rise to power, Mongolia was a bit like a medieval version of the Game of Thrones, with tribes clashing, alliances forming and crumbling faster than you can say dynastic intrigue. Genghis changed all that. He built a system based on merit rather than aristocratic birthright, promoting people based on their skills and loyalty. This was revolutionary in a time when your birth dictated your role more than your abilities did. Imagine if your next job promotion depended on how well you could command a cavalry charge rather than how many years you'd spent warming a desk. Now, let's talk loyalty. In the Mongol world, loyalty wasn't just a nice-to-have. It was the currency that kept the empire running. Loyalty to the Khan was paramount, and it went both ways. Genghis established a code of law known as the Yasa, which, among other things, demanded loyalty and obedience, but also protected the rights of his warriors. It was like an early form of HR policy, ensuring everyone knew their place and their perks. This reciprocal loyalty helped Genghis create a sense of unity among his followers, transforming disparate tribes into a cohesive force. And what about kinship? Here's where it gets juicy. Mongol society was rooted in a complex system of kinship networks, which extended beyond blood relations to include sworn brotherhoods and alliances. These networks were as complicated as a soap opera plot and just as essential for maintaining stability. The Khan's family was the nucleus of the political structure, but it wasn't all nepotism. These connections were strategic, aiming to create bonds that could withstand the pressures of conquest and governance. The Mongols also had a surprisingly sophisticated approach to administration. Forget the stereotype of the barbaric hordes with no sense of governance. They were pragmatists, borrowing administrative techniques from the lands they conquered. Genghis Khan's successors expanded this system further, employing local bureaucrats and adopting practices from China and the Islamic world. It was like a medieval version of best practices sharing, ensuring the empire was run as efficiently as possible. Who knew the Mongols could be such bureaucratic whizzes? Take the decimal system for organizing their military, for example. Units were divided into tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s. It was as if they'd cracked open a management textbook and decided to implement a scalable structure for their operations. This organization allowed for rapid mobilization and flexibility, essential for managing a vast empire where communication could take weeks. And let's not forget the Oru, the postal relay system that Genghis Khan established. It was the medieval answer to FedEx, ensuring swift communication across the empire. With stations placed every 25 miles, it was a marvel of logistical engineering, allowing messages to travel up to 200 miles a day. In an era where news traveled slower than the average garden snail, this was nothing short of revolutionary. The Mongol administration also exhibited an unexpected level of religious tolerance. Genghis Khan himself was a shamanist, but he understood the political value of embracing diverse beliefs. The empire was a melting pot of religions, from Buddhism to Islam to Christianity, and this pluralism was not just tolerated but often encouraged. It was a smart move, ensuring that religious discord didn't undermine the unity of the empire. Imagine a world where your creed didn't limit your place in society. An enlightened approach for the 13th century, to be sure. And speaking of enlightened, Genghis Khan even instituted laws that protected the environment. That's right. The man feared for his ruthless conquests also had a green thumb. He banned the hunting of animals during breeding seasons and established guidelines for sustainable use of resources. It's as if he foresaw the need for conservation centuries before it became fashionable. So, as you sit there, contemplating the intricate web of political and social structures that sustained the Mongol Empire, it's clear that this was no mere collection of nomadic tribes. It was a sophisticated society with a keen understanding of human nature and governance, able to adapt and innovate in ways that left a mark on history. And while the fire crackles and the stories of grand conquests echo into the night, you might realize that the real genius of the Mongols wasn't just in their ability to conquer lands, but in their capacity to rule them. But don't pack up your jur just yet. There's more to explore in the saga of the Mongol Empire. We've yet to delve into the cultural exchanges that these political structures facilitated, the impact on the lands they ruled, and the legacy left behind. So stay tuned, because this historical ride is far from over. And as the Mongol Empire's sprawling tapestry unfurls before our eyes, let's turn the spotlight onto something that's been both the sizzle and the stake of many a historical yarn: Mongol warfare. Now, if Hollywood has taught us anything, it's that Mongols are the quintessential bad guys, galloping over hills with wild abandon, swords swinging, and destruction left in their wake. But hold your horses, literally, because there's more to this story than meets the cinematic eye. First things first, the Mongols didn't just wake up one day and think, let's conquer half the known world because we're bored. Nope, their military strategies were as sophisticated as any chess match, where the stakes were land, power, and sometimes a rather nice bit of silk. And unlike the chaos you might expect, the Mongol war machine was all about precision, psychological warfare, and exploiting every opportunity like a savvy entrepreneur at a clearance sale. Take the infamous feigned retreat tactic, for instance. This maneuver was like the ancient world's version of playing dead. Mongol warriors would simulate a retreat, luring their enemies into a trap with the promise of an easy victory. And just when their foes were too deep in to back out, bam, the Mongols would counterattack with devastating speed and efficiency. It was a bit like dangling a carrot in front of a donkey, only to reveal you're actually a lion wearing a carrot costume. Sneaky, yes, but also brutally effective. And speaking of speed, the Mongols were like the Formula One racers of their day. Their cavalry could cover up to 100 miles a day, an impressive feat considering they weren't fueled by Red Bull. This mobility allowed them to strike swiftly and unexpectedly, a tactic that left their enemies reeling. Their horses, small but sturdy, were the unsung heroes, capable of enduring harsh conditions and surviving on the scantiest of rations. It's like if your car could run on fumes and still outpace a Ferrari. But here's the kicker. Mongol warfare wasn't all about brute force. They were masters of psychological warfare, too. Before laying siege to a city, they'd send envoys demanding surrender, offering clemency in exchange for cooperation. Refuse, and they'd make an example of you. Accept, and you could continue your life under Mongol rule, albeit with a few more taxes. It was a classic carrot-and-stick approach, but with more emphasis on the stick if you dared to resist. Their use of intelligence and espionage was another ace up their sleeve. The Mongols maintained a network of spies and scouts, gathering information about enemy territories, troop movements, and local politics. It was like an ancient version of a CIA operation, minus the wiretaps and satellite imagery. They'd use this intel to plan their campaigns with meticulous detail, ensuring they always had the upper hand. It's as if they had a playbook for every possible scenario, always a step ahead of their adversaries. The Siege of Nishapur in 1221, for example, is a case study in psychological manipulation and military precision. After a brutal battle, the city fell to the Mongols, who then executed a calculated massacre to quash any thoughts of rebellion. It was a grim reminder of what happened to those who defied them. Yet, in other instances, like the capture of the Khwarezmian city of Samarkand, the Mongols demonstrated a more pragmatic approach, sparing the lives of artisans and scholars who could contribute to their empire's prosperity. A bit of a mixed message, perhaps, but undeniably effective. Now, let's clear the air on a popular myth, that the Mongols were nothing more than barbaric looters. Sure, they could be ruthless, but their conquests were driven by more than just the desire for plunder. They were strategic in their acquisitions, targeting regions that offered economic or strategic value. And when they did plunder, it was often with the goal of reinvesting those resources into their empire. Think of it as a hostile takeover with a long-term business plan. Their approach to siege warfare was another testament to their ingenuity. Rather than relying solely on brute force, they employed engineers and specialists, often captured from other cultures, to construct siege engines like catapults and battering rams. It was a bit like borrowing your neighbor's tools to fix your own house, except in this case, you'd also taken over the neighbor's house. They also used psychological tactics to weaken the resolve of besieged populations, spreading rumors, or using captured prisoners as human shields to sow fear and panic. The fall of Baghdad in 1258 is a prime example of Mongol siege tactics at their most ruthless. Hulagu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, led the charge with a force of 150,000 troops, a combination of Mongol and allied soldiers. They surrounded the city, cutting off supplies and employing siege engines to breach the walls. After a 13-day siege, the city surrendered, but not before experiencing the full wrath of the Mongol army. It was a grim chapter in history, yet it underscored the sheer might and tactical acumen of the Mongol military machine. And what about their infamous reputation? Well, that was partly by design. The Mongols understood the power of fear as a tool for control. They cultivated a reputation for brutality as a deterrent, ensuring that many cities surrendered without a fight rather than face the consequences of resistance. It was an early form of psychological operations, branding themselves as both conquerors and administrators, not to be trifled with. Yet, for all their fearsome reputation, the Mongols also had a surprisingly open-minded approach to governance in conquered territories. They often allowed local rulers to maintain their positions, provided they swore allegiance to the Khan and paid tribute. This pragmatic approach allowed the Mongols to expand their empire without overextending their resources. It was all about maximizing efficiency, like running a franchise where the brand name might be Mongol, but the day-to-day operations were locally managed. So, as you contemplate the Mongol way of war, it's clear that their success wasn't just about the sword and the bow. It was about strategy, psychology, and a keen understanding of human nature. They weren't just conquering land, they were building a legacy, one calculated move at a time. And while the fire flickers and the tales of conquest circulate, you can't help but marvel at the blend of ferocity and foresight that defined the Mongol war machine. But stay tuned, because the saga of the Mongols isn't just a story of conquest. It's also about cultural exchanges, the blending of traditions, and the lasting impact they had on the world. So grab another log for the fire, because this historical journey is far from over. As the fire's glow slowly fades, and the echoes of those Mongol conquests linger like smoke in the vastness of the steppe, let's pivot to the legacy these formidable horsemen left behind. Because, spoiler alert, it wasn't all about the battles and the loot. The Mongol Empire, despite its fearsome reputation, acted like a medieval glue gun, sticking together the disparate patches of Eurasia into a more interconnected whole. So, buckle up for a ride across time and space as we unravel how the Mongols didn't just conquer, they reshaped the world. First up, let's talk trade. The Mongols were like the ultimate market disruptors, turning the Silk Road into their personal highway and ensuring it hummed with the vibrancy of commerce. They understood that a stable market was a profitable one, so they set about protecting these trade routes with the dedication of a mall carp on Black Friday. Under their rule, merchants could traverse the 4,000-mile expanse from China to Europe with a reasonable assurance that they'd arrive with their heads still attached to their shoulders. The result, an explosion in cultural and economic exchange that would make your average stockbroker drool. And oh, the goods. We're talking silk, spices, precious metals, and even gunpowder, the latter being a game changer that would eventually revolutionize warfare across the globe. It was like the Mongols held the medieval patents to innovation, and they were more than happy to share the wealth. This free-flowing exchange of goods and ideas was one of the earliest examples of globalization, long before the term became a buzzword in boardrooms. But it wasn't just material goods that crossed those dusty trails. Ideas traveled too, hitching a ride with traders, diplomats, and adventurers. The Mongols, ever the pragmatists, welcomed scholars, artists, and engineers into their empire, regardless of their origin. They were less concerned with where you came from and more interested in what you could bring to the table. This cultural melting pot enriched the empire, leading to innovations in everything from astronomy to medicine. It's as if they ran a medieval TED talk series, gathering the brightest minds to share their insights and discoveries. And then there's the cuisine. Yes, you heard that right. The Mongol Empire even had a hand, or perhaps a hoof, in culinary exchanges. Imagine this. You're a European noble, taking your first bite of a dish spiced with cardamom or cloves, exotic flavors carried across continents by traders under Mongol protection. These new ingredients revolutionized kitchens and palates, leading to a culinary renaissance that would shape tastes for generations. So next time you sprinkle a bit of spice on your meal, tip your hat to the Mongols, those unlikely gastronomic pioneers. Of course, all this trade and cultural exchange wasn't just about broadening horizons and expanding waistlines. It was also about power. By controlling the flow of goods and ideas, the Mongols cemented their influence across Eurasia. Their dominance was like a Wi-Fi signal stretching across continents, sometimes weak, sometimes strong, but always present, connecting disparate cultures under a single network. Yet, for all their contributions, let's not whitewash the brutality that underpinned their expansion. The Mongol conquests were often as devastating as they were transformative. Cities that resisted their rule faced obliteration, their inhabitants slaughtered or enslaved. The siege of Baghdad in 1258, for instance, was a cultural catastrophe, with libraries burned and knowledge lost. It was a brutal reminder of the cost of defiance and the harsh reality of Mongol rule. But here's the twist. The Mongols were also surprisingly progressive rulers. In many conquered territories, they allowed local leaders to retain power as long as they pledged loyalty to the Khan and paid tribute. This hands-off approach facilitated stability and maintained the economic status quo, albeit with a little extra Mongol oversight. It was like a corporate acquisition where the new owners kept the old management in place, so long as they delivered profits. And then there's the myth of the Mongol warrior, that romantic figure galloping across the steppe with the wind in his hair and a bow in his hand. Sure, the reality was less poetic, more like cold nights, endless marches, and the ever-present threat of death. But this image, as enduring as it is misleading, speaks to the duality of the Mongol legacy, both brutal and brilliant, fearsome and forward-thinking. Their administrative structure was another testament to their innovative approach. The Mongols adopted and adapted the best practices from the cultures they conquered, creating a hybrid system that was both efficient and effective. They employed Chinese bureaucrats, Persian accountants, and Islamic scholars, ensuring that their empire was as diverse in its governance as it was in its populace. It was a medieval version of a multinational corporation, with Genghis Khan as the CEO and a board of advisors from around the known world. Fast forward to the modern era, and you can still see the fingerprints of the Mongol Empire on the map of Eurasia. Their conquests facilitated the spread of technologies and ideas that would shape the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. The interconnectedness they fostered laid the groundwork for the modern world, where borders are more porous and cultures more intertwined. It's as if the Mongols were the original architects of a global society, long before the invention of the internet or the airplane. So, as you stoke the fire and let these tales of the Mongol Empire sink in, remember that history is rarely black and white. The Mongols were both conquerors and connectors, leaving a legacy as complex as the empire they built. They were a force of nature, reshaping the world in their image, and their story is a reminder of the power of ambition and adaptability. In the end, the Mongol Empire was more than just a footnote in history. It was a turning point, a bridge between the ancient and modern worlds. Their influence echoes through the ages, a testament to the enduring impact of their conquests, both the glorious and the grim. And as the embers die down and the night closes in, you might find yourself pondering the legacy of these nomadic warriors who conquered not just lands, but also the very fabric of history itself. Your mornings begin with the unmistakable stench of animal fat. Congratulations, you're a medieval candle maker, and if you're wondering why that doesn't come with any glory or prestige, well, let's light a tallow candle and unravel this waxy tale. In the grand hierarchy of medieval trades, you're somewhere below the blacksmith, above the gong farmer, Google it, if you dare, and definitely nowhere near the top, where the goldsmiths and masons sip their metaphorical champagne. Candles in the medieval period were as essential as Wi-Fi today. They lit up the homes, churches, and castles of Europe, making sure the nobility didn't accidentally step on their own tapestry. But before you get carried away imagining yourself as some kind of light-bringing hero, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of your daily grind. You wake up to the delightful task of rendering animal fat, or, if you're lucky and serving the elite, working with beeswax. Beeswax candles, my friend, were the medieval equivalent of a Tesla, clean, efficient, and out of reach for most. Now let's talk economics. Beeswax was as precious as a dragon's hoard, with prices to match. In England, it wasn't uncommon for beeswax to cost about 12 pence per pound, a small fortune when you realize a skilled laborer earned only around 4 to 6 pence a day. Tallow, on the other hand, was the poor man's option. It was cheaper, sure, but made from animal fat. It came with the downside of a lovely, lingering barnyard aroma and a smoke output that could rival a coal factory. Your day-to-day involves dealing with this dichotomy. You're either scraping together materials for your tallow candles or trying not to spill a single drop of liquid gold. Air, beeswax. Candle making in the Middle Ages wasn't just a matter of dipping wicks. It was a delicate dance of economics, craftsmanship, and not gagging at the smell of boiling tallow. The guilds had their say in your life too. Think of them as the medieval version of a union, only with more robes and less tolerance for tomfoolery. They controlled who could make what and where. In London, for instance, the Tallow Chandlers' Company was founded in the 14th century and soon became a big cheese in the candle world. Want to start selling your homemade candles at the market? Better have your guild membership card ready, or else. These guilds made sure you didn't undercut prices or compromise on quality, but they also kept a tight grip on innovation, so don't even think about trying to invent a new wick technology. Socially, you're in a strange position. Candles are essential, making you essential, right? Well, not exactly. You're like the medieval UPS driver. Everyone needs you, but no one's inviting you to the feast. You occasionally brush shoulders with the rich as they order their beeswax beauties, but more often you're down at the market, haggling over tallow prices with other artisans and trying to make ends meet. And speaking of ends, let's not forget the fun of sourcing your materials. Beeswax comes from bees, obviously, and unless you have your own hives, you're at the mercy of beekeepers. As for tallow, that involves a trip to the butcher to pick up scraps and fat, which you then render down in a process that could generously be described as pungent. The whole endeavor is a balancing act of supply and demand, skill and stink, with enough frustration to fill a medieval manor. Despite the unglamorous nature of your work, you're part of a long and venerable tradition. Candle making dates back to antiquity, with evidence of beeswax candles found in Roman ruins. The medieval period saw the craft become more organized and widespread, with regional variations and techniques. In France, they preferred the molded candle method, while in England, dipping was more common. Each candle tells a story of the materials, the maker, and the time in which it was made. But let's not romanticize too much. While historical records might occasionally highlight a few candle makers who struck it rich or gained favor with the nobility, most of your kind lived a simple life, scraping by, often overlooked and underappreciated. It's a dirty, smelly, and sometimes dangerous job when you consider the fire hazards of a workshop filled with flammable materials. Still, without you, medieval nights would be a lot darker. As you finish another long day, arms sore from dipping, you might wonder if it's all worth it. Yet, when you see the warm glow of your candles lighting up a church or a humble home, there's a flicker of pride. You may not be a knight or a king, but you're a part of something essential. After all, in a world without electricity, you're the one holding the light. As you wipe the sweat from your brow, another day of candle making behind you, let's take a deeper dive into what your medieval workday really entailed. First, let's address the elephant in the room, the smell. Medieval candle making was less about ambience and more about endurance. Enduring the stench, that is. The process of making tallow candles was akin to being employed in a 24/7 olfactory horror show. Tallow, for those blissfully unaware, is rendered animal fat, which essentially means you've got a cauldron of bubbling beefy bits, emitting an aroma that could knock out a dragon. If you thought your college roommates' gym socks were bad, try spending a day in a tallow workshop. Your first step in this aromatic adventure is collecting raw materials. For tallow, you're off to the butcher's shop, where you haggle for the less than appetizing scraps. These aren't your choice cuts of sirloin. We're talking about the lard and fatty leftovers that even the local stray dogs turn their noses up at. And then there's the rendering process. This involves heating the fat until it melts and separating the impurities. Sounds simple, right? Well, imagine the medieval version of a chemistry lab, where the risk of explosion is traded for the risk of passing out from the fumes. Candle makers were part-time chemists, juggling temperatures and timing like Gordon Ramsay with a medieval twist. Get it wrong, and you might end up with a smelly, greasy mess rather than something that lights up a room. You were a craftsman, a chemist, and on particularly bad days, a reluctant smell enthusiast. Now, if you were dealing with beeswax, your job was a bit more upscale, but still no picnic. Beeswax is harvested from honeycombs, a process that involves melting and filtering to remove impurities. It was less about holding your nose and more about watching your wallet. The cost of beeswax was so high that it was often reserved for the church or the very wealthy. If you were lucky enough to work with this liquid gold, you were essentially handling the medieval equivalent of a luxury sports car. But don't get too complacent. Even beeswax has its pitfalls. It requires careful temperature control, too hot, and you're looking at another gooey disaster. The health risks. Oh, let me count the ways. Firstly, there's the constant exposure to fumes. Inhaling the smoke from burning tallow or beeswax isn't exactly the medieval equivalent of a spa day. Chronic exposure could lead to respiratory problems, though they didn't have fancy terms like occupational hazard back then. Fires were another constant danger. You're surrounded by flammable materials, open flames, and boiling pots of fat. It's like living in a medieval action movie, minus the heroism, and with a lot more insurance liability. If you're picturing yourself as a heroic figure battling the elements, hold that thought. In reality, you were more like a medieval office worker, dealing with the occupational hazards of your time. Today, people complain about stiff office chairs and dodgy Wi-Fi. Back then, the complaints were more along the lines of, I'm pretty sure my lungs are full of smoke, and I hope I don't catch fire today. Candle makers were also full-time odor bearers. You couldn't exactly pop a tic-tac to freshen up. The stench of tallow lingered, and it wasn't just on your clothes. It clung to your skin, your hair, and probably your very soul. If you managed to snag the attention of a prospective partner, it was likely because they had a poor sense of smell. But don't think for a second that this was an easy life to leave behind. You might dream of escaping the candle-making life for something more glamorous, like farming, or, if you're feeling really adventurous, tax collecting. However, the guilds had other ideas. Once you were in, they made it tough to transition to another trade. Guilds were like the medieval LinkedIn, minus the motivational posts and the random connection requests. They ensured that only skilled craftsmen stayed in the business, but they also trapped you in your smoky, smelly fate. Despite all this, you found ways to cope. Maybe it was the camaraderie of fellow candle makers, or perhaps it was the small victories, like managing to create a batch of perfectly dipped candles without singeing your eyebrows. It was a tough life, but it was your life, and in a world without electricity, you were a necessary part of the medieval social fabric. So, as you put another day behind you and head home, smelling like a walking barbecue, remember that your work was essential. You may not have been dining with the nobility, but your candles illuminated the banquets. You weren't wielding a sword, but your humble flames lit the way for those who did. In the grand tapestry of medieval life, you were a crucial thread, even if you were a little too aromatic for polite company. And so, as your day concludes and you're trudging home, leaving a trail of eau de tallow in your wake. It's time to talk about the economic circus you're unknowingly starring in. You see, your humble candle-making gig is not just a job. It's a high-wire act in a medieval marketplace racked with economic and political shenanigans that would make modern corporate scandals look like playground disputes. Firstly, let's talk about the church and the nobility, those medieval monopolists who had their fingers in every pie, including the candle one. The church, with its endless need for illumination to keep those cathedrals glowing, practically owned the beeswax market, and just like your local Starbucks that somehow appears on every corner, they controlled the market by holding vast tracts of land dedicated to beekeeping. This wasn't just about having a monopoly on honey. It was about controlling the light source everyone wanted but few could afford. Beeswax candles were the Ferraris of the candle world, luxurious, desirable, and out of reach for most, thanks to the church's exclusive dealership. Meanwhile, the nobility had their own game going. They loved their little monopolies, treating them like medieval badges of honor. Because why not? When you're born into privilege, what's another feather in your cap, even if it keeps the common folk in the dark, literally? They could dictate prices and limit production, which meant your candle crafting was always one royal whim away from being snuffed out. And let's not forget taxation, that age-old tradition of squeezing the little guy. The church and nobility levied taxes on candle makers, adding to the already heavy burden you carried. These taxes weren't just pocket change. They were more like a medieval financial black hole. Take, for example, the infamous candle tax in England. Introduced in 1709, it required candle makers to pay a duty on every pound of candle they produced. Sure, this was after the medieval period, but the roots of such burdensome taxes stem from a long history of squeezing tradespeople like you. Even in earlier centuries, taxes were levied on the raw materials you needed, like beeswax and tallow, which hiked up your costs and made it harder to compete. Your wallet wasn't the only thing taking a hit. Your sanity was, too. Because here's the kicker. You couldn't just roll up your sleeves and compete with the big boys. Oh no, the guilds saw to that. The guilds, remember, were like medieval regulatory bodies crossed with secret societies. They dictated who could make candles, where, and how many. They ensured that only those with the right connections, those who could pay off the right people, got the best materials and the best prices. It was all about maintaining the status quo. Speaking of status quos, let's dive into the delightful world of medieval marketing, or lack thereof. In today's world, companies bombard you with ads until you can't escape their jingles. But back then, it was all about word of mouth, a bit of haggling, and if you were really pushing the boat out, a sign above your shop door. Customer service, please. The concept was as foreign as space travel. You dealt with what you got, and if customers didn't like it, they could go elsewhere. Not that there were many options, thanks to those guild regulations. Imagine this. A customer strolls into your dimly lit workshop, complaining about last week's batch of candles burning too quickly. Do you offer them a refund or a replacement? Not a chance. Instead, you might mumble something about the quality of the tallow this season and send them off with an extra dollop of medieval charm. Aka, a shrug. You were more likely to get struck by lightning than win a customer service award in the Middle Ages. And let's not forget the medieval equivalent of branding. Beeswax candles were branded by their mere existence. They were the luxury item everyone desired. Tallow candles, on the other hand, were like the discount versions you wouldn't brag about. Yet, you try to spin a tale of their rustic charm, hoping that would be enough to keep the customers coming back. It was a tough sell, given the smell and smoke that accompanied them. You had to be a master of medieval spin to even dream of tapping into that beeswax market, or more realistically, to get people to stop holding their noses. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. Occasionally, a clever candlemaker might try to undercut the competition with a new twist, perhaps a different shape or a unique scent. But innovation was a risky business, often leading to a guild slapdown if you stepped too far out of line. Your best bet was to keep your head down, produce your candles, and hope for the day when the taxes weren't quite as crippling and the church didn't monopolize every last beeswax hive. In this world, you learn to navigate the economic tides like a seasoned sailor, knowing full well that any moment the winds could change, leaving you adrift in a sea of regulations and taxes. Yet, despite all this, candle makers persisted. They were the unsung heroes of their time, lighting the way both literally and metaphorically. As you closed shop for the day, you might dream of a world where candle making was less about survival and more about art. But for now, you were just trying to keep the lights on, figuratively and literally. And speaking of keeping the lights on, let's address the elephant-sized candle in the room, the myth of the romantic, candlelit medieval castle. Ah yes, the scene is set. Ornate halls bathed in the gentle glow of candles, the air filled with the delicate scent of beeswax. Hold that thought, because the reality was far smokier, smellier, and a lot less Instagram-worthy. You see, while the nobility might have had access to those precious beeswax candles, the vast majority of medieval folks were stuck with their trusty tallow. And by trusty, I mean smelly and sooty. Imagine lighting your home not with the subtle ambience of a Game of Thrones banquet, but with something more akin to a medieval barbecue gone wrong. Tallow candles, made from animal fat, were the poor man's lighting solution, and they came with all the aromatic charm of a barnyard. The truth is, aesthetics took a backseat to functionality. If you were wealthy, sure, you could afford to line your banquet hall with beeswax candles, perhaps even perfumed for good measure. But for the average Joe, the best you could hope for was a dim, flickering light that left more smoke marks than illumination. The romance of a candlelit dinner, more like squinting through the haze to see what exactly you were forking into your mouth. Let's talk about the economics of this flickering fantasy. A pound of tallow could cost as little as a few pence, a bargain compared to the elite beeswax. Yet the bargain came at the cost of your olfactory senses. The smoky haze was your companion, as much a part of your home as the drafty windows and the rats in the walls. It's no wonder people went to bed early, who wouldn't want to escape the sensory onslaught of a room lit by tallow. Then there's the issue of supply. Tallow could be sourced from any butcher willing to part with their scraps, making it accessible, if not exactly desirable. Beeswax, on the other hand, was the medieval equivalent of a rare earth metal. It required hives, beekeepers, and a touch of divine intervention to secure enough for a single candle. The church had a monopoly on beeswax because they could afford to run extensive beekeeping operations, not to mention their divine right to, well, pretty much everything. Now, about those castles. While we'd love to imagine each towering fortress aglow with elegant candlelight, the reality was more about strategic lighting than mood setting. Candles were precious, and even the wealthy had to be practical. Great halls might be lit for feasts and special occasions, but the everyday lighting was far more frugal. You've got to remember that each candle was a mini-economy. A tallow candle burned out quickly, leaving behind an acrid stench and a soot-stained ceiling, while a beeswax candle was too valuable to waste on mundane tasks like not tripping over your own feet. And it wasn't just about the cost. The medieval struggle between aesthetics and functionality was a constant battle. Yes, beeswax was beautiful and clean-burning, but it was also fragile, prone to melting in the summer heat, and expensive to boot. Tallow, while practical and cheap, filled your home with smoke and a scent that only a medieval nose could love. It was a trade-off that shaped not just homes, but the very way people lived their lives. Take, for instance, the laborer's cottage. Here, candles were a luxury, used sparingly and only when absolutely necessary. Most of the time, the family would gather around a single candle, sharing its meager light for as long as it lasted. It was a far cry from the chandelier-lit halls of nobility, and yet that single candle was a symbol of perseverance, a tiny flame against the overwhelming darkness of medieval nights. So, the next time you picture a grand medieval scene, remember that while the nobility might have enjoyed their beeswax glow, the rest of society was stuck with a reality far less enchanting. The dim, smoky glow of tallow candles was the true light of the Middle Ages, casting more shadows than it dispelled. It was a world where the struggle for light was as real as any battle fought with sword and shield. Yet, even in this sooty reality, there was a certain charm. Perhaps it was the camaraderie of gathering together in the dark, or the simple pleasure of a light flickering bravely against the night. In a world lit by fire, candles were more than just a source of illumination. They were a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. And while they might not have offered the romantic glow we imagine today, they provided something far more valuable, a way to push back the darkness, one flickering flame at a time. As we peel back the layers of myth, it's clear that medieval lighting was less about aesthetic beauty and more about pragmatic survival. The allure of candlelit castles is strong, but the reality was a world where light was hard-won and precious. And while the wealthy basked in the glow of beeswax, most people made do with their trusty tallow. It wasn't glamorous, but it got the job done. And in a world without electricity, that was all that mattered. As we step away from the smoky haze of medieval candlelit life, let's flick the switch to a brighter future. The decline of traditional candle making. It's a tale as old as time. New technology arrives on the scene, and suddenly, your trusty old job looks like it came straight out of Jurassic Park. By the late medieval period, the candle-making gig was about to get a serious makeover, courtesy of some shiny new players. Enter stage left, the world of oil lamps and gas lighting. Back in the day, the discovery of more efficient light sources was like finding a Starbucks on every corner of a medieval village. By the 17th century, whale oil lamps became the hot new trend. If you had a sense of irony, you might appreciate that whales, those majestic sea creatures, were unwittingly powering the Enlightenment. Whale oil burned brighter and cleaner than your average tallow candle, and suddenly, candle makers found themselves up against some serious competition. They were like the blockbusters of their time, watching as Netflix, or rather, whale oil, started to steal the show. By the 18th century, gas lighting came into play, turning the whole candle-making industry on its head. It was like the Industrial Revolution had a personal vendetta against candle makers. Gas lamps lit up the streets and homes of Europe with an efficiency that tallow and beeswax could only dream of. The first gas-lit street appeared in Pall Mall, London, in 1807, ushering in a new era of illumination. Candle makers, once the unsung heroes of the night, were now like those poor folks who invested heavily in VHS tapes just before DVDs took over. And yet, despite these massive changes, the legacy of candle makers endures. Their craft was more than just a smelly job. It was a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. They were the original light bringers, the people who kept the darkness at bay, one flickering flame at a time. Their work involved skills and knowledge passed down through generations, a tradition that, while transformed, never truly vanished. After all, who among us hasn't blown out the candles on a birthday cake, made a wish, and marveled at the warm glow of candlelight during a power outage? In the grand tapestry of history, candle makers are like those unsung heroes who never quite get their due. They were chemists, artisans, and survivalists all rolled into one, managing to find light in the darkest of times. Their story is a reminder that even the most mundane jobs can have a lasting impact. In fact, the very word chandler, derived from the Latin candelarius, meaning candle maker, remains a testament to their craft. Fast forward to today, and you'll find that candle makers have something in common with modern-day professions that the technological tide has swept aside. Consider the case of the video store clerk, once the gatekeeper of Saturday night entertainment, or the humble typist, a staple of the pre-digital office landscape. These roles, like candle making, were integral to their time, but ultimately replaced by new technologies. Yet, much like the candle makers of old, they leave behind a sense of nostalgia that's hard to shake. It's a curious thing, this human penchant for nostalgia. We romanticize the past, even when it was filled with the pungent smell of tallow or the frustration of rewinding VHS tapes. Candle makers remind us that every job, no matter how small or smelly, plays a role in the bigger picture. They lit the way for those who followed, paving the path for the bright, illuminated world we know today. So, as we conclude our journey through the waxy world of medieval candle making, let's raise an imaginary beeswax candle to the craftsmen who kept the flames alive. Their legacy is one of resilience, innovation, and a touch of stubborn determination. In a world constantly evolving, they remind us that while the tools may change, the human spirit burns brightly. You could say that's the real light they've left behind, a flicker of hope in the vast darkness of history. And as you blow out that imaginary candle, remember that every job, no matter how outdated it seems, has its moment in the sun, or in this case, under the glow of a candle. Candle makers may have been eclipsed by technological advances, but their story shines on, a beacon of innovation and perseverance in the annals of history. Frederick Douglass's story kicks off not with a whimper, but with the clinking chains of reality. Born in February 1818, deep in the heart of Maryland's Talbot County, Douglas began life as a statistic in the sprawling system of American slavery. Now, the details around his birth are a bit of a muddle, not unlike trying to catch a fish with your bare hands. His exact birth date is a mystery, a reminder of the dehumanizing nature of enslavement, where even your birthday is a footnote, if noted at all. Douglas's mother was Harriet Bailey, but his father, well, that's a question mark, though whispers suggested he might have been a white slave owner. Talk about a family reunion you'd rather skip. Right from the start, Douglas's life was a jumble of contradictions, born into a system designed to keep him down, yet destined to rise and shake the very foundations of that system. By the age of 7, Douglas was shipped off to Baltimore, like cargo with a pulse. And here's where our story takes a turn worth noting. Baltimore was a bustling port city, a stark contrast to the rural plantations. It was here that Douglas had his first taste of something that would become his obsession: literacy. In a society where teaching an enslaved person to read was like handing them a key to a prison cell, Douglas's future was about to get interesting. In Baltimore, he was sent to live with the Auld family. Enter Sophie Auld, a woman who, at first, saw no harm in teaching young Frederick the ABCs. But as the story goes, her husband Hugh Auld shot that down quicker than you could say cat. Hugh believed literacy would spoil the best nigger in the world, turning him unfit for slavery. Well, Hugh, you weren't wrong. Douglas later recalled that this was his first real lesson in the power of knowledge as a tool for freedom. If they didn't want him to read, then reading was precisely what he needed to do. So, what did Douglas do? He turned the streets of Baltimore into his classroom and the neighborhood kids into his tutors. Armed with bread as currency, because who doesn't love free food? He traded the baked goods for lessons in reading and writing. It was an act of rebellion wrapped in a brown paper bag, and it worked like a charm. By the time he was a teenager, Douglas had cracked the code, quite literally, and was devouring newspapers, books, and anything else he could get his hands on. Now, let's pause for a second to appreciate the absurdity here. A young boy risking severe punishment, teaching himself to read, all because the adults around him were terrified of the implications. It's like trying to stop a dam from bursting with a roll of duct tape, inevitably futile and a bit comical. Frederick Douglass wasn't just teaching himself to read. He was laying the groundwork for a revolution. He realized that literacy was more than just understanding words on a page. It was about understanding the world and finding his place in it. Douglass famously said, "Once you learn to read, you will be forever free." It was a powerful declaration, and in his case, a prophecy. The significance of his early years in Baltimore cannot be overstated. It was here that Douglass began to see the cracks in the institution of slavery. He saw enslaved people who were treated with a modicum of humanity, unlike the brutal conditions he'd known on the plantation. But he also saw the hypocrisy, the way slavery warped everyone it touched, not just the enslaved, but the enslavers too. It was like peeling an onion, layer by layer revealing the putrid core of a system built on oppression. Through all of this, Douglass was honing his skills, not just in literacy, but in rhetoric. He was becoming a master storyteller, a skill that would serve him well in his future life as an orator. He was learning to wield words as weapons, sharp and precise, capable of cutting through the thickest of chains. And those who underestimated him, well, they'd soon find themselves on the wrong side of history. In the end, Douglass's early life wasn't just about survival. It was about defiance. It was about taking the tools of the oppressor and turning them into instruments of liberation. By teaching himself to read, Douglass was doing more than breaking the law. He was breaking the mold, setting the stage for a life that would challenge the very system that sought to define him. And to think, it all started with a loaf of bread and a bit of barter. And so, with a loaf of bread and a bit of barter as his unlikely allies, Frederick Douglass was not just reading his way to freedom, but plotting his escape. Now, let's flash forward a bit to 1838. Douglass is 20 years old, and he's had enough of the dehumanizing carousel that is slavery. It's time to make a break for it. But this isn't your run-of-the-mill prison break. This is the stuff of legends. No grand schemes or Hollywood explosions, but rather a borrowed sailor's uniform and a steely resolve. Douglass's escape plan was so audacious, it might make a modern-day heist movie seem tame. He borrowed the uniform from a free black sailor, along with a set of seaman's protection papers. a kind of 19th century passport that provided him some semblance of cover. The idea was simple yet brilliant. Blend in with the bustling maritime world, where a black sailor wouldn't raise an eyebrow, unlike an enslaved man on the run. On September 3, 1838, Douglas boarded a northbound train from Baltimore, his heart no doubt pounding like a war drum. The journey was around 224 miles, a formidable distance to cover when you're betting your freedom on a disguise and a bit of luck. But before we get too caught up in the romance of the runaway narrative, let's talk about the stakes. The penalty for a failed escape attempt was brutal. Capture meant a return to the chains, but with added lashes as a welcome-back gift. Douglas was well aware of this. He later wrote, "I felt as one might feel upon a plank in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean." Not exactly a pleasure cruise, but fear didn't stop him. Instead, it fueled him. Arriving in New York City, Douglas stepped foot into a world that was both exhilaratingly free and chillingly hostile. It was a place of paradoxes, a city teeming with opportunity, but also rife with racial prejudice. Freedom was not a golden ticket, but more like a scratch-off lottery card with uncertain rewards. Douglas knew he'd have to navigate this new world with the same cunning that got him there. Let's pause and talk economics. In 1838, New York was a hub of industry and commerce, a place where the cost of living was as steep as the buildings. A day's wage could range from $1 to $1.50, while a loaf of bread cost around 5 cents. Not exactly a cushy margin when you're trying to make a fresh start. Compare this to the South, where the economy was agrarian and the cost of living was lower, but at the horrific price of human bondage. Douglas had swapped one challenge for another, chains for the invisible shackles of poverty and prejudice. Yet, Douglas was nothing if not resourceful. He found work as a laborer and later as a caulker in New Bedford, Massachusetts, a whaling town where he could blend into the maritime culture. The shift from Baltimore to New York and eventually to New Bedford was like going from a smoldering pan into a different kind of fire. But Douglas was not just surviving, he was strategizing. By 1839, he was attending abolitionist meetings, absorbing ideas like a sponge, and crafting his own voice. Here's where reality meets romance again. Douglas's eloquence and storytelling ability didn't just appear overnight. They were honed in the crucible of experience and necessity. He wasn't just a man with a story. He was a man with a mission. A mission to not just tell his own story, but to become a mouthpiece for the countless others still shackled. But let's not skip over the complexities. Freedom didn't mean acceptance. Even in the North, Douglas faced discrimination that could be as cold as a New England winter. The free black man was still, in many eyes, a second-class citizen. This duality of freedom and prejudice was a dance Douglas learned to master, using every opportunity to speak out against the injustices he witnessed and experienced. In New York, Douglas had found freedom, but he had also found a new kind of battle, a battle against the societal chains that still held many in bondage. This wasn't just about personal liberation, it was about systemic change. Douglas was beginning to see the bigger picture, and he knew that literacy, eloquence, and sheer determination were his best weapons. He was becoming a force to be reckoned with, a dynamic presence in the abolitionist movement that was gathering steam like a locomotive bound for change. So there you have it, Douglas's daring escape and the tumultuous journey into a new life. It was a beginning, not an end, a chapter that set the stage for the man who would become one of the most powerful voices for abolition. But don't worry, the story doesn't end here. We're just getting started. There's much more to unravel, more myths to bust, and more truths to tell as we continue to follow Frederick Douglass's remarkable journey. Stay tuned, history buffs. So, Frederick Douglass has just made his daring escape and leap into the fiery furnace of freedom. But what's next for this newly minted free man? Well, he didn't just sit around sipping on celebratory champagne. Oh no, Douglas was about to turn the volume up to 11 on the abolitionist circuit, where his speeches would be more electrifying than a rock concert and as thought-provoking as a TED talk. By the early 1840, Douglas was already making waves. His first real splash in the public speaking pool came in 1841 at the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society's annual convention. Imagine this. Douglas, a former enslaved man, standing in front of a room full of people who were as eager to hear his story as they were to see if he'd stumble. Spoiler alert, he didn't. His speech was such a showstopper that the society quickly offered him a job as a full-time lecturer. Talk about being headhunted. Douglas's oratory was more than just eloquence. It was a full-throttle experience. He had a voice that could carry across fields and a presence that commanded rooms. His speeches were raw and real, pulling no punches when describing the grotesque realities of slavery. He was known for his fiery delivery, and let's just say, his words could cut sharper than a barber's razor. One particular gem from his speeches: I expose slavery in this country because to expose it is to kill it. Now that's a mic drop moment if ever there was one. But let's dive into some concrete data, because who doesn't love a good statistic? Douglas gave over 500 speeches between 1841 and 1845. That's more than one speech a week, folks. And remember, this was before the age of air conditioning and podcast mics. He was on the road constantly, traveling by bumpy coach or train, with accommodations that were often as welcoming as a porcupine in a sleeping bag. The financial side of this gig wasn't exactly a walk in the park either. Douglas's salary was modest, about $4, $50 a week, barely enough to cover the cost of a decent pair of shoes, let alone the wear and tear of constant travel. Yet he spoke not for riches, but for a cause that was richer than gold. And while the compensation might seem like small potatoes, the impact of his speeches was anything but. His words reached thousands, stirring hearts and minds, and turning indifferent observers into passionate abolitionists. Now, let's talk rivalries, because no good story is complete without a bit of drama. Douglas's rise to fame wasn't without its detractors. Some abolitionists were wary of Douglas's growing influence. The fear that he was becoming too big for his britches, a star that might outshine the movement itself. William Lloyd Garrison, a giant in the abolitionist world and Douglas's initial ally, grew increasingly uneasy as Douglas began to assert his independence and critique the Garrisonian methods. The classic mentor-turned-rival plotline, as old as time. But Douglas wasn't about to be anyone's puppet. He began to distance himself from Garrison and his camp, and by 1851, Douglas had fully split from the Garrisonians. He started his own newspaper, the North Star, because why not add publisher to his growing resume? The North Star became a beacon for anti-slavery sentiment and a platform for Douglas to express his own brand of abolitionism, which was less about moral suasion and more about demanding immediate, uncompromising emancipation. Of course, the abolitionist circuit wasn't all standing ovations and heartfelt applause. There were hecklers, and not the kind you can laugh off with a witty retort. Douglas often faced violent opposition, with mobs that were more interested in silencing him than debating him. In 1843, during the famous 100 Conventions tour, a grueling series of lectures across the Midwest, Douglas was attacked in Pendleton, Indiana. The mob beat him so severely that his hand was broken, an injury that never fully healed. Yet, in true Douglas fashion, he was back on the podium as soon as he could stand. Let's not forget about the stage mishaps either. Picture this. In an era before microphones, Douglas had to rely on sheer lung power to reach the back of the room. And sometimes, the acoustics were less than ideal, like trying to sing opera in a cave. But Douglas had a knack for using even the worst situations to his advantage, turning technical difficulties into opportunities for humor and engagement. And here's where the economics come back into play. The abolitionist circuit might have been a moral crusade, but it was also a financial gamble. Tickets to hear abolitionists speak were often free or cheap, relying on donations and the goodwill of supporters to cover costs. In a society still deeply divided on the issue of slavery, raising funds was as challenging as trying to sell ice to an Eskimo. Yet Douglas's charisma and the sheer power of his speeches kept the movement afloat, proving that sometimes passion can pay the bills, albeit just barely. As Douglas's reputation grew, so did his influence. He was invited to speak across the United States and even overseas. In 1845, after publishing his first autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, he embarked on a speaking tour of the British Isles. The book sold 500 copies within 3 months, a runaway success that capitalized on the public's hunger for first-hand accounts of slavery's horrors. In Britain, Douglas was treated less like a curiosity and more like the dignitary he was. The British public, fascinated by his story and captivated by his eloquence, helped raise funds to purchase his freedom, effectively making him a free man in the eyes of the law. It's a bit ironic, isn't it? The land from which America had fought to break away was now helping to free one of its most vocal critics. So here we are, with Douglas not just surviving, but thriving, using his voice to shake the very foundations of a nation steeped in the sin of slavery. His speeches were more than just words. They were calls to action, echoes that reverberated through halls and hearts alike. And while his journey was fraught with challenges, both financial and physical, Douglas's rise as an orator was undeniable. But let's not wrap this up just yet. There's much more to unravel. As we venture deeper into the life of Frederick Douglass, we'll see how his words continue to shape the course of history, challenging the status quo and inspiring generations to come. So hold onto your hats, because this ride is far from over. Stay tuned for the next chapter in the remarkable saga of Frederick Douglass, where the man becomes the legend. And so, as Frederick Douglass's voice reverberated through halls and echoed across oceans, he was gearing up for his next act, one that didn't just involve speaking his truth, but printing it. Welcome to the 1840s, where Douglas decided that the spoken word was just the appetizer. It was time for the main course, served in black and white on the crisp pages of his own newspaper, the North Star. Now, let's get something straight. Launching a newspaper in the 19th century wasn't like starting a blog today. There were no user-friendly platforms or digital subscriptions. It was more like trying to launch a rocket with a matchstick. Printing presses were massive beasts, clunky and expensive. We're talking around $400 for a decent press, a small fortune back then, equivalent to about $13,000 today. And that's before you factor in the cost of paper, ink, and labor. But let's not underestimate Douglas. He was no stranger to overcoming monumental odds. With the help of allies like abolitionist Gerrit Smith and the English Quaker couple Anna and Ellen Richardson, who had previously helped buy his freedom, Douglas managed to scrape together the funds. It was a testament to the power of networking before LinkedIn made it easy. His supporters weren't just benefactors, they were believers in the power of his voice and the change it could ignite. The North Star hit the presses in December 1847 with a tagline that was as bold as Douglas himself. Right is of no sex, truth is of no color, God is the father of us all, and we are all brethren. Talk about setting the bar high. The paper was a mixture of news, opinion pieces, and calls to action, aiming to be a beacon for abolitionists and an irritant to slaveholders. Now, running a paper wasn't all ink stains and late-night editorial meetings. Douglas faced challenges that could make a modern-day editor's head spin. Censorship was a constant threat. Not the kind where someone just unfollows you on social media, but the kind where your paper could be banned or seized for being too incendiary. And let's not forget the competition. The North Star was up against well-funded, mainstream papers that had no qualms about maintaining the status quo. Economically, the paper was walking a tightrope. Subscriptions were the lifeblood of any 19th century newspaper, and Douglas charged just $2 a year, around $65 today, hoping to attract a wide range of readers. But in a time when $2 could buy a week's worth of groceries, convincing people to part with their cash for a paper that championed an unpopular cause was no small feat. Douglas was hustling harder than a lemonade stand owner in a desert. Yet, despite the financial strain, the North Star quickly became a must-read for abolitionists. Douglas's editorials were fiery sermons, decrying the evils of slavery and calling for immediate emancipation. He didn't just preach to the choir, he set it on fire, challenging even fellow abolitionists to rethink their tactics. His pen was as sharp as his speeches, and his words were crafted to stir even the most complacent hearts. Let's pause for a moment of myth-busting. There's a romantic notion that Douglas's paper was universally loved by abolitionists, but the truth is a bit messier. Some within the movement saw Douglas as a threat to their own agendas. His insistence on black self-determination and critique of white paternalism ruffled more than a few feathers. Not all abolitionists were ready to hear that their brand of reform was more condescending than constructive. But Douglas wasn't about to compromise. He knew that true change wasn't just about freeing bodies. It was about freeing minds. And the North Star was his platform to challenge the narrative, to punch through the polite platitudes and demand real, systemic change. It was more than a newspaper. It was a manifesto, a call to arms wrapped in eloquence and ink. Let's talk logistics, because this wasn't just about ideals. The North Star was printed weekly, each edition a labor of love and necessity. Douglas, ever the multitasker, often wrote, edited, and even helped with the physical printing. It was a hands-on operation in every sense of the word. Paper cuts were a daily hazard, and the smell of ink was as familiar as his own shadow. But the rewards, the rewards were worth every ounce of sweat. The North Star reached thousands, spreading its message far beyond Douglas's speeches. It was a megaphone for the voiceless, a chronicle of the struggle for freedom, and a testament to the power of the press to shape public opinion. Douglas was not just making history, he was printing it. And let's not ignore the irony. Here was a man born into a world that denied him the right to learn, now wielding the written word with a mastery that silenced critics and inspired allies. If there was ever a poetic justice, this was it. A former enslaved man leading a literary revolution. But the path was not without its bumps. Douglas faced financial difficulties that would have sunk lesser men. Keeping the North Star afloat was like trying to keep a leaky boat from capsizing. Advertisers were scarce, and anti-abolitionist sentiment made securing funding a constant challenge. Yet Douglas persisted, relying on donations, speaking fees, and sheer determination to keep the presses rolling. Let's circle back to the bigger picture. The North Star wasn't just about abolition. It was about advocating for a new kind of America, one where equality was not a lofty ideal, but a lived reality. Douglas used his platform to speak out on women's rights, temperance, and education, broadening the scope of his activism. He wasn't just building a paper, he was building a movement, one that saw the interconnectedness of all struggles for justice. And as the paper grew in influence, so did Douglas's stature. The North Star became a symbol of his relentless pursuit of justice, a testament to his belief that words could change the world. Yet, Douglas never saw it as his sole legacy. He knew that the fight for freedom was bigger than one man or one paper. It was a collective struggle, one that required the courage of many voices and the strength of countless hands. So here we have Frederick Douglass, not just an orator, but a publisher, a man who turned his own hard-won literacy into a tool for liberation. His story was not just one of personal triumph, but of communal resilience. The North Star shone brightly, illuminating the path toward a future where freedom and equality were not just dreams, but inevitable realities. As we pause in this chapter of Douglas's life, it's clear that his journey was far from over. The North Star was just one of many milestones on his path. As we look forward to the next stage of his remarkable journey, we see a man continually evolving, continually challenging the world to be better, fairer, and freer. So hold tight, history enthusiasts. We're not done yet. There's more to uncover, more to explore, and more to admire in the life of Frederick Douglass. The legend continues, and the story is far from over. Stay tuned for the next installment in this epic saga of courage, conviction, and change. As we journey into the final act of Frederick Douglass's life, buckle up for a whirlwind of history, politics, and a touch of myth-busting magic. Douglass, now not just a man but a movement, was about to meet the towering figure of his time, Abraham Lincoln. If you think this was your typical buddy movie, think again. It was more like two titans of history engaging in a chess match, each move loaded with consequences. The meeting took place in August 1863, amid the smoke and chaos of the Civil War. Douglas, ever the strategist, had been critical of Lincoln's initial hesitation on emancipation, but credit where it's due. Lincoln pulled through with the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863. It's easy to romanticize this as a shining moment of justice, but reality check. This was as much a strategic move as it was a moral one. Lincoln was playing a high-stakes game of poker with the Confederacy, using emancipation to weaken the Southern war effort by encouraging enslaved people to flee to Union lines. But let's dive into the nitty-gritty of that Douglas-Lincoln tete-a-tete. Douglas, never one to mince words, pushed Lincoln on the unequal pay and treatment of black soldiers in the Union Army. Yeah, you heard that right. The guys risking their lives to fight for a nation that had once enslaved them were getting paid less and treated like secondary citizens. Lincoln, with his characteristic political acumen, listened, but didn't immediately promise change. Still, Douglas walked away with an invaluable ally in the White House. And speaking of allies, Douglas wasn't just fighting battles in the Oval Office. He was a relentless advocate for the recruitment of black soldiers, a move that wasn't just about filling ranks, but about reshaping the narrative of what it meant to be an American. By the end of the war, about 180,000 black men had served, accounting for roughly 10% of the Union Army. Talk about rewriting history in real time. The end of the Civil War in 1865 was anything but a fairy tale ending. Reconstruction was like trying to build a house on quicksand. The 13th Amendment might have abolished slavery, but the South quickly found loopholes through black codes, designed to keep African Americans in a limbo of quasi-freedom. Douglas, ever the pragmatist, didn't just sit and complain. He plunged headfirst into the murky waters of politics, using his oratory skills to advocate for true equality. Enter the myth-busting section. Douglas wasn't some untouchable hero who floated through life on a cloud of moral superiority. Nope, he was knee-deep in the muck, navigating political alliances and rivalries that make Game of Thrones look like a tea party. He held several federal appointments, including U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia and Minister resident to Haiti. These weren't just honorary titles. They were strategic positions where Douglas could push for policy changes and civil rights advancements. But let's not sugarcoat the era. Reconstruction was a mess, a well-intended, poorly executed attempt to rebuild a nation divided by war. The economic landscape was a patchwork of poverty and opportunity. The Freedmen's Bureau was supposed to help newly freed slaves transition to freedom, but it was underfunded and overwhelmed. The North's industrial economy was booming, but the South was like a boxer reeling from a knockout punch, struggling to find its footing. And then there's the small matter of the Ku Klux Klan, founded in 1865, spreading terror like a malignant shadow across the South. Douglas knew the fight for freedom was far from over. His speeches during Reconstruction were as fiery as ever, denouncing not just the Klan, but also the complacency of those who allowed such terror to thrive. He once said, "Slavery has been fruitful in giving itself names. It has been called the peculiar institution, the social system, and the impediment. It has been called by a great many names, and it will call itself by yet another name. And you and I and all of us had better wait and see what new form this old monster will assume." A little prophecy mixed with a healthy dose of cynicism, reflecting the harsh reality of post-war America. As we move into Douglas's later years, let's talk legacy. How does a man born a slave end up a national icon? Statues and honors, sure, but the real legacy was in the minds he changed and the courage he inspired. Douglas wasn't just a symbol. He was a catalyst, pushing America to live up to its own lofty ideals. He didn't just leave behind a legacy of speeches and writings. He left a blueprint for resistance and resilience. Now, if we were to debunk some myths, it's crucial to note that Douglas's life wasn't a perfect upward trajectory. He faced betrayals, both personal and political, and lived to see Reconstruction's promises unravel. Yet, he remained a steadfast advocate for equality until his death in 1895. He was a man who could walk into any room and command respect, yet he never forgot the bitter taste of chains. And there you have it. Frederick Douglass, a man whose life was a testament to the power of literacy, oratory, and relentless spirit. He was a self-made man in every sense, not because he pulled himself up by his bootstraps, but because he understood that real change required both individual action and collective struggle. His story is one of transformation, not just of a man, but of a nation grappling with its own conscience. So as we close the book on Frederick Douglass, let's not think of him as a relic of history, but as a continuing challenge to keep pushing for justice. His life was a masterclass in resilience, a symphony of defiance, and an inspiration for anyone daring enough to dream of a fairer world. Douglass once said, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress." It's a line that remains as relevant today as it was in his time, a timeless reminder that the fight for equality is never truly finished. And with that, dear history buffs, we wrap up our journey through the life of Frederick Douglass. A life that began in chains and ended in triumph. A story that reminds us of the power of words to change the world. As we ponder his legacy, let's remember that history is not just about the past. It's about the present and the future we're all shaping. So keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing for that better tomorrow. Until next time, stay curious and stay inspired. There's something deliciously ironic about the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. Here was a city that rose, quite literally, from the muck and reeds of Lake Texcoco to become the pulsating heart of an empire that, at its peak, boasted a population of around 200,000 souls. That's right, this ancient megacity was essentially the Manhattan of its day. Take that, New York. Now, Tenochtitlan wasn't just a random pile of rocks and logs. Oh no, this was urban planning on steroids. The city was laid out in a neat grid, divided by canals and causeways, making it both a logistical dream and a tourist's worst nightmare. Picture Venice, but with more jaguars and less gelato. The Aztecs were masters of their environment, using ingenious agricultural techniques like chinampers, floating gardens, to feed their burgeoning population. These weren't your average backyard veggie patches. Each chinamper could produce up to 7 crops a year, essentially making them the Aztec version of a high-yield investment. But let's not get carried away with the romance of it all. The truth is, Tenochtitlan's rise was as much about strategic brilliance as it was about sheer force. You see, the Aztecs were the new kids on the block, arriving in the basin of Mexico around the 13th century. They started off as mercenaries, which is a pretty nice way of saying they were the muscle for hire. Over time, however, they played a masterful game of political chess, leveraging alliances and backstabbing enemies until they found themselves at the top of the heap. It's like a medieval version of Survivor, but with more obsidian weapons. At the summit of this social hierarchy was the Huey T. Latoni, or the Great Speaker. And no, this wasn't just some guy with a booming voice. The emperor was both a political and spiritual leader, believed to have a heartline to the gods themselves. Imagine being the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and the Pope all rolled into one. Not a bad gig if you can get it, though the job security was about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. Religion, of course, was the glue that held this society together. The Aztecs were polytheists, worshipping a pantheon of gods who, quite frankly, had some pretty high maintenance requirements. Sacrifices, both animal and human, were a regular part of keeping the cosmos in balance. It's a harsh reality that's often glossed over in the more romanticized versions of Aztec history. But hey, nobody said running an empire was all sunshine and rainbows. Tenochtitlan was more than just a city. It was a statement, a declaration of Aztec ingenuity and ambition. From its bustling marketplaces to its grand temples, the city was a microcosm of the empire's power and complexity. But behind the grandeur was a society that, like any other, was built on the backs of its people, laborers, artisans, farmers, whose stories often get lost in the shuffle of history. As we delve deeper into the structure of Aztec society, let's keep in mind that while the Huey T. Latoni may have sat on top, it was the collective effort of thousands that truly kept the city afloat, quite literally in this case. So, here's to the underdogs of history, the unsung heroes of Tenochtitlan, who turned an island in a lake into a symbol of an empire's might. And speaking of the unsung heroes, let's slide up a rung on the social ladder and meet the Pippleton, the Aztec nobility. Picture a group of people for whom wearing snazzy feathered capes wasn't just a fashion statement, but a job requirement. These folks were the blue bloods of Tenochtitlan, tasked with running the show while looking fabulous. Their daily lives. Think of them as living in a real-life episode of Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, Aztec edition. And they didn't just live extravagantly because they could. It was their divine right, handed down by the gods, or so they said. To get a sense of their opulence, we need to talk about Tlaxcala, one of the largest markets in the Aztec realm. With its sprawling stalls and bustling vendors, it was basically the Aztec version of your local Costco, but with more obsidian knives and 0 free samples. The market was a kaleidoscope of goods, textiles, pottery, exotic feathers, you name it. The Pippleton would peruse these stalls, trading items using cacao beans as currency. Yes, you heard that right. Those little chocolate nibs we now turn into our favorite guilty pleasure were once a serious form of cash. Imagine buying a house with Hershey's Kisses. 100 beans could get you a turkey, 1,000 a decent slave. Not to glamorize slavery, But it's crucial to understand just how embedded this was in the economic machine that kept the nobility's lifestyle ticking. Then there's the warrior class, another pillar of Aztec society. These guys are often painted by Hollywood as the original action heroes, all rippling muscles and heroic deeds. But let's pump the brakes on that chariot ride. Sure, they were the Empire's military might, but their day-to-day was as much about paperwork as it was about prowess. Think of them as part-time gladiators, full-time bureaucrats, when they weren't off expanding the Empire's borders or capturing prisoners for sacrifice. Because, priorities. They were likely managing agricultural projects or overseeing construction work. In other words, they had to be as comfortable with a quill as they were with a spear. Of course, there were perks to being a warrior. Land grants, tribute from conquered regions, and a chance at joining the knightly orders like the Eagle and Jaguar warriors. These elite units were the Aztec equivalent of special forces, and membership was a license to strut like a peacock, literally, given their feathered regalia. But behind the glamour was a harsh reality. Success in battle wasn't just encouraged, it was demanded. Failure, well, let's just say it wasn't career-enhancing. Here's a juicy tidbit for you. The warrior ethos wasn't just about martial skill. It was a path to social mobility. That's right, even a commoner could rise through the ranks if they were brave or lucky enough. Capture 4 enemies alive, and you could snag a promotion. It's as if the battlefield was a particularly gruesome corporate ladder, where the stakes were as high as, well, your life. As for the logistics of running such a complex society, let's not forget the economic engine that made it all possible. At its heart was the tribute system, where conquered territories paid their dues in goods, labor, or services. Imagine having to send a portion of your annual income to the IRS, except instead of money, you're sending corn, jade, or, for the really unlucky, your own people. This was the Empire's lifeblood, fueling everything from religious ceremonies to construction projects. It was a system that kept the Pippleton in finery and the warriors in feathers. But it also sowed seeds of resentment among the subjugated cities, a powder keg just waiting for a spark. It's a sprawling, complicated tapestry, isn't it? The Pippleton and warriors were the glamour and muscle of the Empire, but they were also cogs in a much larger machine. Their lavish lifestyles and military exploits were supported by a vast network of trade, tribute, and yes, a fair bit of intimidation. As we peel back the layers of this society, remember that the pageantry and power were built on a foundation as fragile as the Chinempers themselves. So, as we continue our journey through Tenochtitlan, keep your eyes peeled for the cracks beneath the surface glamour, because where there's smoke, there's often an entire city on fire. In the theater of Aztec society, the Parchdecker were the unsung producers who ensured the show went on, even if they didn't always get top billing. These merchants were the lifeline of the Empire's economy, crisscrossing Mesoamerica in search of goods, stories, and sometimes a little espionage on the side. Think of them as the Indiana Joneses of the Aztec world, minus the fedora, but with a healthy dose of intrigue and risk. Now, before you picture them as mere shopkeepers, let's set the record straight. The Parchdecker were more akin to a hybrid of Wall Street traders and intelligence agents. These guys weren't just hawking trinkets in the market square. They were orchestrating trade networks that stretched from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. We're talking about a logistical operation that would make even modern supply chain managers break into a cold sweat. The heart of their operation was the bustling marketplace of Tenochtitlan, where goods from the farthest reaches of the Empire were exchanged. But the Parchdecker didn't stop at trading. They were the Empire's eyes and ears, gathering intelligence on foreign lands and potential threats. If there was a buzz about a rebellious tributary state, you can bet it was the Parchdecker who first picked up the scent. They were the original corporate spies, blending commerce with a dash of cloak and dagger. Speaking of commerce, the Parchdecker traded in everything from cacao beans to jaguar pelts, each item carrying its own weight in the Empire's economy. A single cacao bean was worth a tamale, while a rabbit set you back about 30 beans. For something as luxurious as a jaguar pelt, you'd better start counting your beans in the thousands. This wasn't just trading for survival. It was an economic ballet where each step had to be executed with precision. Despite their critical role, the Parchdecker had a somewhat paradoxical status. They were respected for their wealth and knowledge, but also eyed with suspicion for their power and influence. It's as if they were simultaneously the most popular and most envied kid in school. And while they enjoyed certain privileges, like access to the upper echelons of society, they were also bound by strict codes. Stepping out of line could mean losing not just their status, but their heads. A stark reminder that in this world, power was always a double-edged obsidian blade. Let's swing over to the artisans and craftspeople who added the splash of color to Tenochtitlan's otherwise stone-cold aesthetics. These folks were the creative geniuses behind the elaborate featherwork, intricate jewelry, and stunning mosaics that adorned the city. They were the Michelangelos and Picassos of their time, turning raw materials into pieces of art that could make even the guards weep with envy. But here's the kicker. While their work was admired by nobles and emperors alike, their own lives were far from glamorous. Artisans often belonged to a special class called the Tolteca, and despite their skills, they faced a reality more precarious than a chinemper in a storm. The romanticized vision of a carefree artist, crafting masterpieces by day and reveling by night. Pure fantasy. Many artisans worked under strict guild-like systems that dictated their lives down to the last bead or brushstroke. A bad season or a missed deadline could spell disaster, not just for their finances, but for their very survival. Their materials were sourced from across the empire, often through the very trade networks the Parchdecker operated. Exotic feathers from the Quetzal bird, for instance, were worth more than their weight in gold. These treasures were transformed into items that adorned the nobility and were offered as tributes to the guards. Yet, while their creations were priceless, the artisans themselves were often paid in kind, sometimes receiving food or basic goods in exchange for their labor. It's like being paid in exposure, except exposure doesn't fill your stomach. Despite these challenges, the artisans played a pivotal role in society. The grandeur of Tenochtitlan, from the towering temples to the vibrant marketplaces, was as much a testament to their skill as it was to the empire's power. Their work was a physical manifestation of the Aztec ethos, a blend of beauty and brutality that defined the civilization. So, as we peel back the layers of this intricate society, remember that behind the glamour and grandeur of Tenochtitlan were the tireless efforts of the Parchdecker and artisans. These were the people who kept the wheels of the empire turning, even if history hasn't always given them their due. They walked a tightrope between admiration and adversity, their lives a testament to the complexity of human ambition and creativity. And as we continue our journey through the Aztec capital, let's keep an eye out for the stories that often go untold, the ones that reveal not just the triumphs, but the trials of those who dared to dream and dared to do. All right, buckle up as we dive straight into the gritty, less glamorous yet utterly essential world of the Aztec commoners, known as the Myeongseong. These folks were the beating heart of Tenochtitlan, the unsung heroes who kept the city's wheels greased and turning while the elites were busy preening in their feathered capes or conducting high-stakes diplomacy through ritual sacrifice. First, let's talk about farming, the backbone of Aztec life. The Myeongseong were the ones out there in the fields, working those chinempas like their lives depended on it. And spoiler alert, they did. These floating gardens were not just clever engineering marvels, but lifelines that fed the city's ever-growing population. Imagine producing up to 7 crops a year on land that wasn't even technically land. It's like having a personal farm on a houseboat. Corn, beans, squash. These were the staples, the holy trinity of Mesoamerican agriculture. Add in some chilies for spice, and you've got yourself a diet that fueled an empire, all thanks to the sweat and toil of the commoners. But farming wasn't a year-round gig, and when they weren't planting or harvesting, Myeongseong were often conscripted into military service. Yep, these guys doubled as soldiers, called up to join campaigns whenever the emperor decided it was time to flex some muscle. Picture a world where your average Joe farmer suddenly becomes a weekend warrior. Except instead of paintball, it's actual warfare, complete with obsidian-tipped weapons and the terrifying possibility of becoming a sacrifice yourself if captured. Talk about a brutal work-life balance. And while we're on the subject of sacrifice, let's address the myth of social mobility. The romantic notion that any Myeongseong could rise through the ranks to become a noble is, well, mostly bunk. Sure, there was a theoretical ladder to climb, but it was about as sturdy as a ladder made of tortillas. Catch 4 enemy soldiers alive on the battlefield, and you might get a bump in status. But this was no easy feat when your adversaries were just as keen to turn the tables on you. Now, let's discuss tribute obligations, a harsh economic reality that made the Myeongseong's lives a constant juggling act. These obligations were essentially a tax system, but with fewer loopholes and no tax returns. The Aztec Empire demanded tribute from its subjects, often in the form of labor or goods. We're talking everything from corn and textiles to military service and even human lives. Failure to meet these demands could result in severe punishment, making the phrase death and taxes a very literal reality for these commoners. It was like living under a never-ending audit, where the stakes were life or death. Despite these harsh realities, there was one surprising beacon of egalitarianism: education. That's right. The Aztecs had a compulsory schooling system that spanned social classes, a concept that might seem progressive even by today's standards. Boys and girls alike attended school, though the curriculum varied drastically depending on your social standing. For the Myeongseong, education focused on practical skills, farming, craftsmanship, and basic military training. But it also included lessons in history, religion, and moral conduct, because even in a world where you might end up on an altar, good manners still counted for something. For the sons of nobility, education was a different beast altogether, with an emphasis on leadership, rhetoric, and the finer points of Aztec theology, preparing them for lives of power and privilege. The fact that education was mandatory across the board reveals an Aztec society more complex than a simple tale of conqueror and conquered. It was a society keenly aware that its strength lay in the collective knowledge and skills of its people, even if that knowledge was sometimes used to maintain a rather brutal status quo. As we peel back the layers of Tenochtitlan's social dynamics, it's clear that the Myeongseong were an integral part of the empire's machinery. They were the ones who made sure the city didn't just survive, but thrive. From the fields to the battlefield, their lives were an intricate dance of duty and survival, dictated by the whims of guards and emperors alike. So, the next time you find yourself grumbling about taxes or the daily grind, spare a thought for these Aztec commoners. Because in their world, the stakes were a lot higher, and the rewards, if they came at all, were hard-won. And as we continue our exploration of this ancient metropolis, remember that while Tenochtitlan's grandeur might have been built on the backs of its people, it was their resilience, their sweat, and their stories that truly defined the city. So, let's keep diving deeper, unearthing the tales of those who lived in the shadows of pyramids and palaces, because their legacy is as vital as the stones and statues that remain. Sliding further down the Aztec social ladder, we hit rock bottom, literally and figuratively, where we find the Tenochtitlan, or slaves, and prisoners of war. If you thought the life of a Myeongseong was tough, hold onto your obsidian blades, because this is the gritty underbelly of Aztec society. These were the souls who worked the hardest, and had the least, the human cogs in the empire's relentless machine. Now, let's clear up a common misconception. Aztec slavery wasn't your run-of-the-mill chattel slavery that might come to mind. It had its own peculiar set of rules, and believe it or not, some room for maneuver. Imagine a system where, in certain cases, a slave could own property, marry, and even buy their freedom. It's like a Kafkaesque version of Monopoly, where the stakes are life and liberty, and the rules are set by someone who's definitely not playing fair. Slavery in Tenochtitlan was often a result of debt, punishment, or capture in war. Debtors who couldn't pay up might find themselves sold into servitude, while criminals could be sentenced to slavery as a form of punishment. War captives, on the other hand, were the empire's double-edged sword. They were either destined for sacrifice, appeasing the guards in a gruesome display of power, or they were integrated into society as slaves. Talk about a lose-lose situation. But here's where the Aztecs throw a curveball. Slaves could rise from the ashes, literally buying their way out of bondage. It was a tough climb, but not impossible. If a slave could scrape together enough goods or currency, they could negotiate their freedom. It's as if the Aztec legal system had a built-in escape hatch, albeit one that was hard to reach. And let's not overlook the fact that if a slave managed to escape to the emperor's palace and made it past the guards without getting caught, they were automatically granted freedom. It's a loophole that sounds more like a plot twist from an action movie than a legal stipulation. In this harsh landscape of servitude, the Aztecs also had an eye for talent. Skilled slaves, particularly those who were artisans or craftsmen, could find themselves in a unique position. Their talents were often exploited for the benefit of their masters, but their skills also made them valuable assets. Master who recognized their slaves' potential might even invest in their education or trade, hoping to profit from their enhanced skills. It's a twisted version of talent management, where the stakes were as high as the rewards were rare. As we step back and survey the Aztec social hierarchy, it's clear that the empire was a complex mosaic of innovation and exploitation. On one hand, you have the architectural and agricultural marvels that make Tenochtitlan legendary. On the other, the brutal realities of a society deeply entrenched in slavery and sacrifice. It's a civilization that thrived on contradictions, where beauty and brutality went hand in hand. The Aztecs were masters of their environment, yet they couldn't escape the inherent inequalities that defined their empire. The legacy of Tenochtitlan is as intriguing as it is haunting. Here was a city that dazzled with its ingenuity and ambition, yet it was also a place where the price of progress was often paid in blood. The complex social system of the Aztecs continues to captivate our imaginations, challenging our perceptions of what it means to build an empire. It's a reminder that behind the grandeur of any civilization lies a tapestry of human stories, of triumphs and tragedies, of innovation and oppression. In the end, Tenochtitlan's story is a reflection of the human condition itself, a relentless pursuit of greatness, tempered by the harsh realities of survival. It's a testament to the resilience and creativity of a people who dared to dream and dared to do, even when the odds were stacked against them. And as we look back on the ruins of this once great city, we're reminded of the enduring fascination with its legacy, a legacy that continues to inspire, provoke, and challenge us to see beyond the myths and uncover the truths that lie beneath. The sun is barely peeking over the horizon, casting an orange glow that's more like a promise than a reality. And there you are, ankle-deep in the thick, sticky banks of the Nile. Welcome to your morning routine in 1500 BCE, where the latest fashion in footwear is mud. Each squelching step serves a purpose, though. You're gathering the Nile's finest clay, the lifeblood of your craft, and essentially your entire existence. Forget coffee. This is how you start your day with a squishy bang. Now, let's talk about this clay. It's not just any old dirt. This is the Nile clay, a gift from the annual inundation that makes the pharaoh look like a genius for declaring himself a god. It's rich, it's pliable, and it's every potter's dream. You know this because without it, you're about as useful as a sieve in a sandstorm. The clay is what transforms into the parts, jars and bowls that fill homes and markets, and sometimes, if you're lucky, tombs of the wealthy. It's no exaggeration to say that in this barter economy, your pottery is as good as gold. Well, maybe not gold, but definitely silver. Okay, maybe bronze. You get the point. Once you've lugged your clay back to the village, your arms feeling like they've been through an ancient workout regimen designed by the gods of pain themselves, it's time to get cracking. Literally. You break down the clay, removing any debris, because nobody wants a surprise rock in their amphora. Cleanliness isn't just next to godliness. It's next to not getting yelled at by customers who find their wine dribbling out of a poorly sealed part. As you knead the clay, you can almost hear the bustling sounds of the market starting up. Picture it. Traders setting up stalls, the air filled with the yells and barters of goods being exchanged. Wheat for parts, parts for linen, linen for, well, more parts. Your creations are in hot demand. Storage jars, in particular, are the ancient equivalent of IKEA furniture, ubiquitous, necessary, and sometimes inexplicably difficult to assemble. And why is pottery so important? Beyond the obvious need to store grain, water, and beer, especially beer, let's be honest, pottery is the backbone of Egyptian trade. Your village, with its prime location along the Nile, is a bustling hub. Boats are loaded with goods, and your parts are among them, traveling downstream to Thebes or even further into the Mediterranean. Imagine your handiwork, seen by dignitaries in Crete or Cyprus. Not that you'd ever get to see those places yourself, but it's nice to know your parts get out more than you do. In the grand scheme of things, pottery was a symbol of economic stability, something even the pharaoh took note of. Pottery was not just an art form, it was a necessity. And in the barter economy of ancient Egypt, your parts could fetch you anything from food to tools to, if you're particularly savvy, a new pair of sandals. Think of it as ancient stock trading, but instead of shares, it's shards. Speaking of which, pottery shards are the archaeologist's best friend, a minor consolation to you if a pot breaks. At least your mistakes will be immortalized in a museum someday. As the market buzz reaches a crescendo, you can't help but feel a sense of pride. You, with your muddy feet and clay-streaked arms, are part of something bigger, a network of trade and economy that sustains your village and connects you to the wider world. And as the sun climbs higher in the sky, warming your back as you shape yet another piece of clay, you might just crack a smile. After all, who needs gold when you've got a kiln? As you bask in that moment of pride, your hand instinctively reaches for a hunk of clay, ready to morph it into something both mundane and magical. Let's get into the real magic trick of ancient pottery, the techniques. Spoiler alert, it's not all about some lone genius toiling away in obscurity, crafting masterpieces under the Egyptian sun. Nope, it's a bit more crowded than that. First up, let's tackle hand building. This is the OG method, no fancy gadgets, just pure skill. Imagine squatting down, your hands kneading the clay like it's some kind of ancient stress ball. It's all about pinching, coiling, and slab building. Pinching involves shaping the clay with your fingers, creating small, simple forms. Think of it like making a pinch pot in kindergarten, but your livelihood depends on it. Coiling. That's where you roll out long ropes of clay and stack them on top of each other, smoothing them together. It's like making a clay snake, but instead of a third-grade art project, it's a storage jar for grain that could mean the difference between eating and, well, not eating. And then there's slab building, which is as straightforward as it sounds. You roll out a slab of clay and cut it into shapes, which you then assemble into your desired form. It's kind of like making a gingerbread house, but without the sugar-induced hyperactivity. Each technique demands patience and precision, qualities that are as valuable as gold, or maybe bronze, depending on the market that day. But let's not forget the game changer, the potter's wheel. Around 2500 BCE, some genius, whose name, sadly, history didn't bother to jot down, decided that manually shaping every pot was for the birds. Enter the potter's wheel, the ancient equivalent of a power-up in a video game. Suddenly, potters could spin their clay, creating more symmetrical shapes faster than ever before. This innovation didn't just change the game, it rewrote the playbook. The wheel allowed for greater consistency and production speed, meaning more parts, more trade, and hopefully more sandals for everyone. Despite its revolutionary impact, the wheel didn't exactly make things easy. It required skill, coordination, and a level of focus that's hard to maintain when the sun is trying to bake you alive. You'd sit there, one foot working the wheel while your hands danced above it, guiding the clay into shape. It was a full-body workout before full-body workouts were a thing. And while it might sound like a solitary pursuit, picture this: a bustling workshop where multiple potters, from apprentices to masters, are working alongside you. The air is filled with the rhythmic hum of spinning wheels and the chatter of craftsmen, each one contributing to the collective effort. It's a scene that shatters the romantic image of the lone potter, isolated like a hermit in the desert. Instead, pottery was a community affair. Apprentices, often young boys, learned the trade from seasoned artisans. They started with the basics, prepping clay, cleaning the workshop, and gradually moved on to more complex tasks. The master potter, a seasoned veteran of the craft, would oversee operations, ensuring quality and managing production. It was a hierarchy as structured as the parts themselves, with each piece fitting perfectly into the whole. And let's talk economics for a moment. Pottery wasn't just about creativity, it was serious business. The demand for pottery was as constant as the Nile's flow. Every household needed parts for storage, cooking, and rituals. The wealthier you were, the more elaborate your ceramics became, with intricate designs and vibrant colors. Meanwhile, the average family might settle for utilitarian pieces, no less important but certainly less flashy. The potter's wheel had democratized pottery to some extent, making it accessible to more people and boosting the local economy. Yet, even with all these advances, the life of a potter wasn't exactly cushy. It was hard, physical work. The kiln, an essential part of the process, was like an ancient furnace. You need to carefully stack your parts inside, controlling the temperature by adjusting the fuel, usually wood or dried dung. Too hot, and your parts would crack. Too cool, and they wouldn't harden properly. It was a delicate dance of heat and timing, requiring a keen eye and steady hands. Let's debunk a myth while we're at it. The idea that pottery was a man's world. While men dominated the trade, women also played a crucial role, especially in domestic pottery production. They might not have been running the workshops, but they certainly weren't absent from the scene. In fact, women often helped shape smaller items and were key players in the finishing process, adding decorative touches that transformed a simple part into a piece of art. So, as you sit there, surrounded by spinning wheels and the chatter of your fellow potters, take a moment to appreciate the complexity of this ancient craft. It's not just about shaping clay, it's about shaping culture. From the humblest storage jar to the grandest ceremonial vessel, each piece tells a story of collaboration, innovation, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. And as the sun begins its descent, casting long shadows over the workshop, you know that tomorrow you'll do it all over again. Because in the grand tapestry of history, your parts are more than just objects. They are artifacts of a civilization, enduring through the ages like echoes of an ancient song. As the sun reaches its zenith, casting an unforgiving glare over the land, it's time to crank up the ancient furnace, the kiln. This isn't your neighborhood pizza oven. It's more like an open invitation to a personal sauna session with a side of potential disaster. Welcome to the fiery heart of ancient pottery making, where the line between success and shambles is thinner than a papyrus scroll. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of firing up these bad boys. Kilns in ancient Egypt were no architectural marvels. Think more along the lines of a mud brick igloo with a bad temper. Typically, these kilns were built into the ground, with space for a fire below and a chamber above for your parts. The Egyptians weren't just winging it, they had a method. And it was a method that required constant vigilance, kind of like babysitting. But instead of toddlers, you're dealing with fragile ceramics and potential fires. Temperature control. Forget about it. The ancient Egyptians didn't have thermometers to measure the perfect heat. What they had was intuition, experience, and a keen eye on the color of the flames. They relied on the color of the kiln's interior and the smoke it emitted to judge when it was hot enough. Too cool, and you might as well have made your parts out of sand. Too hot, and you end up with a pile of cracked clay that's about as useful as a chocolate teapot in the desert. Speaking of failures, let's bust a myth. The idea that ancient pottery was always perfect. Sorry to burst your bubble, but for every stunning artifact that survived millennia, there were countless parts that shattered, cracked, or warped into shapes only a mother could love. The reality: pottery was a trial-and-error process, a fact conveniently glossed over in the romanticized tales of perfect antiquity. When things went south, which they often did, the potters had to get creative. Imagine this. You've got a batch of parts that came out looking like they were designed by Salvador Dali. What do? Well, if you were a resourceful ancient Egyptian, you might repurpose them. Broken pieces could be ground down and recycled into new clay or used as temper to strengthen future parts. It's the ancient version of upcycling. Waste not, want not, especially when your livelihood is on the line. And let's not forget the economic stakes. A botched firing meant more than just a bruised ego. It could mean a significant hit to your bottom line. Those parts weren't just art, they were currency. In an economy where bartering was the name of the game, a successful batch of pottery could be traded for essentials like grain, linen, or even livestock. So every time you fired up the kiln, it was like rolling the dice in a high-stakes game where the prize was survival. The kiln was also a social hub of sorts. Picture it. As the fire roars, potters gather around, swapping tips and tales, each one hoping their batch will emerge unscathed. It's a scene that highlights the communal aspect of ancient pottery, the shared knowledge and camaraderie that came from working side by side in the sweltering heat. And while the kiln was a place of potential disaster, it was also a crucible of innovation and learning, where techniques were honed and traditions passed down. In the grand tapestry of ancient Egyptian life, the kiln was more than just a tool. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of nature's whims. Because let's face it, controlling fire is no small feat, especially when your only resources are mud bricks and sheer determination. Yet, despite the challenges, or perhaps because of them, the kiln became a cornerstone of the potter's craft. As the afternoon sun begins to dip, casting long shadows over the village, the kiln continues to blaze, a beacon of both risk and reward. Each part that emerges intact is a small victory, a testament to the skill and perseverance of its creator. And while the process may seem daunting for those ancient artisans, it was all in a day's work, a dance with fire that defined their existence and left a legacy as enduring as the parts themselves. So, as you stand there, wiping the sweat from your brow and watching the kiln glow with the intensity of a second sun, consider this. In the world of ancient Egypt, the potter was both artist and alchemist, transforming humble clay into vessels of both utility and beauty. It's a craft that demanded not just skill, but courage, the kind that comes from facing the flames and emerging with something greater than the sum of its parts. And while the kiln may be temperamental, it's also a testament to the relentless spirit of the potters who dared to tame it. They were the unsung heroes of their time, the craftsmen whose work supported a civilization and connected it to the world beyond. In the end, whether their parts were destined for a pharaoh's tomb or a humble peasant's hearth, each one carried the mark of its maker, a silent witness to the skill and ingenuity that shaped the world of ancient Egypt. As the last of the parts are pulled from the kiln, the fire gradually dies down, leaving behind a glow of satisfaction and the promise of another day. And while the challenges are far from over, there's comfort in knowing that tomorrow will bring new opportunities, new creations, and perhaps, just maybe, a little less drama from the kiln guards. Until then, the dance continues, one pottery shard at a time. As the final embers of the kiln settle into a gentle glow, it's time to dig into a different kind of firestorm, the social and political whirlwind that ancient Egyptian pottery found itself in. Pottery, it turns out, wasn't just the Tupperware of the ancient world. It was a canvas of cultural expression, a political plaything, and a global ambassador wrapped in clay. Let's start with the designs. If you've ever seen Egyptian pottery, you know it's not just about function. These pieces were often adorned with motifs that told stories or depicted gods, animals, and daily life. But beyond their aesthetic appeal, these motifs were messages, cultural postcards, if you will, sent across the ancient world. We're talking about the kind of pottery that made people stand up and say, "Hey, I want that on my shelf." Take the lotus flower, for example, which was a favorite design element. It symbolized rebirth and the sun, tying pottery to the spiritual and political realms. When a pot bearing the lotus motif ended up in foreign lands, it wasn't just an export, it was a cultural ambassador. It told the story of Egyptian beliefs and values, a silent yet eloquent envoy of the pharaoh's domain. And let's not forget the scarab beetle, another popular motif. This little guy was a symbol of protection and transformation, making its way onto pottery that could end up in the hands of someone in Canaan or even Greece. Now, these motifs weren't just about aesthetics or spiritual significance. They had political weight. During periods of Egyptian expansion, particularly in the New Kingdom around 1550-1077 BCE, pottery styles were like ancient Instagram posts, showcasing power and influence. As Egypt flexed its muscles in the Mediterranean, its pottery styles and motifs became hot commodities, coveted by neighboring cultures. It was the ancient equivalent of having the latest iPhone. Owning Egyptian pottery was a status symbol, a declaration of sophistication and connection to a powerful civilization. The trade routes were buzzing with exchanges, and pottery was often at the heart of these interactions. Egyptian pottery made its way to places like Cyprus, Crete, and even further afield. We're talking hundreds of kilometers. Folks, no small feat in a time when fast travel involved a boat and a lot of rowing. These parts would travel along with wine, oil, and grains, making Egyptian motifs a common sight in the ancient marketplace. But here's a myth worth busting. The idea that Egypt was an isolated civilization, walled off by its deserts and the Nile. In reality, Egypt was a bustling hub of trade and cultural exchange. Far from being insular, the Egyptians were active participants in the Mediterranean's vibrant trading network. Pottery was both a product and a tool in this web of connections, helping to weave a tapestry of shared influences and ideas. And let's talk about prestige. Owning Egyptian pottery was more than just a practical matter. It was a statement. In a world where social standing was as fragile as an unfired pot, having Egyptian ceramics on display was akin to having a Picasso in your living room. It spoke of wealth, sophistication, and connections. This wasn't just pottery. It was a social marker, a testament to one's place in the world. Yet, even as Egyptian pottery symbolized power and prestige, it also tells a tale of adaptation. As trade routes expanded and cultures intermingled, Egyptian potters began incorporating foreign elements into their designs. You might find a Cretan swirl here or a Cypriot pattern there. This wasn't cultural appropriation, it was cultural evolution. Potters weren't just artists, they were cultural diplomats, blending styles and techniques to appeal to a broader market. But don't get too caught up in the romance. The reality was that pottery making was still a grind. The potters' lives, though enmeshed in this grand tapestry, were often arduous. For every part that made it to a foreign market, countless others broke, cracked, or simply failed to sell. The stakes were high, with every kiln firing a gamble in the game of survival. And while the pharaohs and elite might bask in the glory of their international influence, the potters remained the unsung heroes. Their hands, calloused and stained, were the ones that shaped the symbols of Egyptian power. It was their skill and creativity that enabled Egypt to project its image across the ancient world. So, as the afternoon sun begins to mellow and the shadows lengthen, take a moment to ponder the real magic of ancient Egyptian pottery. It's more than just clay and fire. It's a record of human connection, of cultural and political currents that flowed alongside the Nile and beyond. Pottery was the silent witness to the rise and fall of empires, a testament to the enduring spirit of a civilization that, far from isolated, was deeply enmeshed in the rich tapestry of the ancient world. As you watch the potters begin to pack up their tools, preparing for another day of clay and fire, remember this. Each part, each shard, holds a story of ambition and artistry, of connection and competition. And while the narratives may shift with the sands of time, the essence remains. Pottery, humble and profound, continues to speak across the ages, a reminder of the shared journey of humanity. As the last potter brushes clay dust off their hands and the sun dips below the horizon, a sense of completion and continuity hangs in the air. It's a moment that echoes through time, revealing the humble yet profound legacy of ancient Egyptian pottery. A legacy that, believe it or not, is still speaking to us today, albeit in a language of shards and fragments. You see, to modern archaeologists, pottery is like the Rosetta Stone of everyday life. Those broken bits of ceramic tell tales of trade, technology, and taste, far more eloquently than any dusty old scroll. Take, for example, the Amarna period around 1350 BCE. Pottery from this era shows a shift in style, hinting at the cultural revolution under Pharaoh Akhenaten, whose penchant for sun worship and artistic experimentation left its mark not just on the walls of temples, but in the very clay of his time. And let's not forget the pottery from the bustling city of Memphis, a hub of production and innovation. The ceramics unearthed here reveal a sophisticated society, one where the demand for both utilitarian and decorative wear was insatiable. Imagine a city where the kilns never cooled, where pottery was churned out in such volumes that even today piles of discarded potsherds, known as ostraka, tell stories of economic booms and busts. These bits of broken pottery also serve as time capsules, preserving the fingerprints of day-to-day existence, literally. Fingerprints found on ancient Egyptian ceramics provide insights into the people who made them, the techniques they used, and even the size of their hands. It's a forensic goldmine that brings us closer to understanding the potters, not as faceless figures in a distant past, but as real people with real lives, struggles and triumphs. But let's dispel the notion that every piece of pottery holds a grand secret. The truth is, most of it was as mundane as your favorite coffee mug. Sure, there are a few pieces that might give Indiana Jones a run for his money in the mystery department, but more often than not, pottery was about as mysterious as your last Amazon delivery. It was about practicality, storing grain, carrying water, or fermenting beer. And while the allure of the ancient mystery may draw us in, it's the everyday reality that truly fascinates. In fact, it's this very ordinariness that makes pottery so extraordinary. It's the everyday objects that paint the clearest picture of ancient life. Forget the grand tombs and golden treasures. It's the pots and pans that reveal the rhythms and routines of a society. Each shard is a pixel in the bigger picture of history, and together they create a mosaic of humanity's past. So, what can we learn from these ancient artisans as we sip our evening tea in a world of instant everything? For one, patience. Pottery wasn't a quick gig. From clay gathering to kiln firing, each step required time, skill, and a bit of luck. In an era of immediate gratification, there's something to be said for a craft that demands we slow down and savor the process. And then there's the lesson of resilience. Potters faced countless challenges, kiln disasters, market slumps, the whims of fashion, and yet they adapted and persisted. Their work was a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of improvement. It's a reminder that while technology and society may have evolved, the core of human endeavor, creativity, perseverance, and community remains unchanged. As you ponder these thoughts, consider the global nature of ancient Egyptian pottery. It wasn't just a local craft, it was a cornerstone of international relations. Those parts that made their way to distant lands were more than just goods. They were cultural emissaries, building bridges between civilizations long before the internet made it easy. And in today's interconnected world, where cultures clash and converge at an unprecedented pace, there's something profoundly relevant about this ancient exchange. Pottery teaches us about the power of sharing, of ideas, of art, of life itself. It's a legacy of unity and diversity, a reflection of a world that, while separated by time and space, is bound by the same human spirit. As the stars begin to twinkle in the Egyptian sky, casting their ancient light on the land of the pharaohs, take a moment to appreciate the humble potter's legacy. It's a story of survival, of creativity, and of connection, timeless lessons etched in clay and fired in the crucible of history. And while the parts themselves may have been fragile, the impact they left behind is anything but. In every shard, we find a piece of ourselves, a reminder that even the smallest, most unassuming objects can tell the grandest stories. Cyrus the Great was born into a world where the most reliable thing was your own shadow, and even that could be a bit treacherous if someone with a knife was around. Around 600 BCE, Persia was a patchwork quilt of ambition, greed, and the odd moments of diplomacy, stitched together by warring tribes and backstabbing kings. This wasn't your typical once-upon-a-time scenario. It was more like once upon a chaos, where the only thing thicker than the sandstorms was the sense of political maneuvering. The early days of Persia were anything but serene. The region was dotted with a smorgasbord of tribes and small kingdoms, each with their own set of rules, grudges, and aspirations. Imagine a neighborhood where every house has its own government and everyone thinks they're the rightful king of the block. That was 6th century BCE Iran for you. At the center of this mess was the Medes, a major player in the region, sort of like the big kid on the playground who everyone tries to befriend or overthrow, depending on the day. The Medes had a knack for expanding their influence, having built one of the more notable kingdoms in the area. They ruled over a patch of land that was impressive for the times, stretching across much of present-day Iran. Their king, Astyages, wasn't exactly the most popular guy on the block, but he had the crown, and that counts for something. His rule was marked by the usual royal intrigues, with alliances as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Meanwhile, the Persians, under the leadership of the Achaemenid clan, were trying to find their place in this turbulent world. The Achaemenids were not exactly top dogs yet, more like aspiring underdogs with a vision. They were based in a small region called Anshan, a relatively quiet corner compared to their noisy neighbors. But ambition doesn't need a loud start, and the Achaemenids had it in spades. Enter Cyrus Roman II, better known as Cyrus the Great. Born around 600 BCE, Cyrus was like the new kid in school with a lot to prove. His lineage was impressive, with claims of descent from both Persian and Median nobility. The story goes that his grandfather, Astyages of Media, had a dream that his daughter's offspring would overthrow him. You know, the usual family drama. So, in a move that screams ancient soap opera, Astyages ordered the infant Cyrus to be killed. But surprise, the order was botched, and Cyrus lived to become a legend. Cyrus grew up in a world where family gatherings could mean either a royal banquet or a coup plot. By the time he came of age, the Achaemenids had built a reputation for themselves, and Cyrus, with his mix of charisma and military prowess, was ready to make his mark. The political landscape was ripe for change, and the Medes, with their less-than-beloved king, seemed like a good place to start. But let's back up a bit. What made this world such a pressure cooker of ambition and intrigue? For starters, the region's geography was both a blessing and a curse. Persia was a crossroads of ancient trade routes, making it a lucrative prize for anyone who could hold it. However, these same routes also made it a hotspot for invasions and conflicts. The landscape was as varied as the people who lived there, with mountains, deserts, and fertile valleys all thrown into the mix. This was no flat, easy-to-defend kingdom. It was a patchwork of territories, each with its own strategic and economic importance. Economically, this was a time of barter and trade, with goods ranging from textiles to precious metals changing hands in bustling markets. The Persians, in particular, had a knack for commerce, a skill that would serve them well as they expanded their influence. Politically, the scene was as complex as a modern-day soap opera. Alliances were made and broken faster than you could say dynastic marriage, and loyalty was often a matter of convenience rather than conviction. Cyrus's rise to power wasn't just about brute force, it was about seizing the moment. The Medes were ripe for a shake-up, and Cyrus, with his unique blend of diplomacy and military strategy, was ready to provide it. His approach was revolutionary for the time. Instead of the typical conquer and destroy method, he favored a more inclusive strategy. This meant respecting local customs and incorporating different peoples into his growing empire, a tactic that would prove to be his secret sauce. Historians often paint Cyrus as a benevolent ruler, a king who cared for his subjects and respected their traditions. While there's some truth to this, it's worth remembering that he was also a shrewd politician. His policies were as much about keeping the peace as they were about expanding his influence. After all, an empire is only as strong as its weakest link, and Cyrus knew that a content populace was less likely to rebel. But let's not sugarcoat it. The world Cyrus was born into was harsh, and the stakes were high. Rulers didn't just lose their crowns, they often lost their heads. Political ambition was a double-edged sword, capable of elevating a family to greatness or plunging it into oblivion. Cyrus was acutely aware of this, and it shaped his approach to governance and conquest. The Achaemenid Empire was born out of this chaotic milieu, a testament to Cyrus's vision and leadership. His ability to navigate the treacherous waters of politics and power set the stage for what would become one of the largest empires in history. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. At this point, Cyrus was still just a young ruler with a lot to prove, standing at the precipice of greatness with the world watching, waiting to see if he'd leap or fall. As Cyrus stood on the brink of greatness, the sands of Persia whispering tales of his impending glory, he knew he needed more than just a sword to carve his legacy. Enter the Median Empire, a ripe target for his ambitions and conveniently run by his grandfather Astyages. Now, family reunions can be awkward, but this one took the cake. Astyages, perhaps still miffed about that little prophecy of being overthrown by his grandson, had not exactly rolled out the red carpet for Cyrus. Instead, he rolled out an army, which, let's be honest, is the ancient equivalent of a passive-aggressive holiday card. Cyrus, however, wasn't just any ruler. He was a maestro of military strategy and psychological warfare. Around 550 BCE, he launched his campaign against the Medes, not with a brute force assault, but with a cunning blend of diplomacy and subterfuge. It wasn't just swords clashing, it was minds battling. Cyrus's army, reportedly numbering between 20,000 to 30,000, wasn't the largest, but it was disciplined and fiercely loyal. He didn't just rely on numbers, he relied on brains, and according to legend, a bit of treachery didn't hurt either. The story goes that Cyrus managed to sway a key Median general, Harpagus, to his side. Why? Because Astyages had once served Harpagus a rather unpleasant dinner involving the latter's own son, a classic case of the boss from hell. This grisly tale might sound like the stuff of myths, and maybe it is, but it paints a vivid picture of the kind of guy Astyages was, not exactly winning employee of the month. With Harpagus's defection, Cyrus's victory was almost assured. It was less a battle of armies and more a battle of wits, and Cyrus was playing chess while Astyages was stuck on checkers. After defeating Astyages, Cyrus was not in the mood for a bloodbath. Instead, he pulled a move straight out of the How to Win Friends and Influence People playbook, Ancient Edition. He spared Astyages and married his daughter, cementing his control over the Median Empire and securing a more peaceful transition of power. This act of clemency was like a PR dream come true. It painted Cyrus as a benevolent conqueror, a ruler who valued loyalty over fear. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't just altruism at play. Cyrus understood that dead enemies don't pay taxes or help run an empire. With the Medes now under his belt, Cyrus turned his gaze outward. The world was a buffet of potential conquests, and Cyrus had brought his appetite. His next moves were strategically brilliant. He expanded his territories methodically, like a chess player eyeing the board, one calculated move at a time. By the time he turned his attention to Lydia, around 546 BCE, Cyrus was a seasoned player in the Game of Thrones. Lydia, ruled by the fabulously wealthy Croesus, was a tantalizing target, not just for its gold, but its strategic position as a gateway to the Aegean. Croesus, confident in his wealth and alliances, famously misinterpreted the oracle of Delphi's prophecy that if he attacked Cyrus, he would destroy a great empire. Turns out, the great empire was his own. Oops. Cyrus took his time, waiting until the Lydian forces were resting for the winter before launching a surprise attack. It was a masterstroke of timing and patience, and by the time the dust settled, Croesus found himself a guest, Reed, prisoner of Cyrus. Once again, Cyrus chose clemency over carnage. Instead of executing Croesus, he reportedly consulted him on matters of state, gaining invaluable insights into his newly acquired lands. This wasn't just mercy, it was practicality wrapped in a velvet glove. By incorporating former enemies into his administration, Cyrus ensured smoother governance and kept rebellion at bay. But let's not romanticize this too much. For every act of mercy, there were undoubtedly countless acts of ruthlessness that were simply too mundane for the history books. Cyrus's reputation as a magnanimous ruler was growing, but so too was his empire. It stretched from the Mediterranean to the Indus River, a vast expanse that required innovative governance. Enter the satrapy system, a kind of ancient franchise model for empire management. Each region, or satrapy, was overseen by a satrap, basically a governor with a fancy title, who collected taxes, maintained order, and occasionally had to deal with the odd insurrection. It was a system born of necessity, a method to keep the empire's diverse populations in check, while ensuring that Cyrus's coffers were never empty. This system wasn't just about efficiency, it was about control. By allowing a degree of local autonomy, Cyrus could maintain the loyalty of his subjects without micromanaging every village square. It was governance by delegation, and it worked remarkably well. But let's not forget the iron fist in the velvet glove. The Persian military was never far away, a reminder that rebellion was a one-way ticket to a swift end. Now, here's where history and myth start tangoing a little too close for comfort. Cyrus's reputation as a nice guy conqueror is often highlighted by his actions in Babylon. In 539 BCE, Babylon was the jewel of the ancient world, a city so rich it could make a Scrooge rethink his life choices. Nabonidus, the Babylonian king, had managed to alienate the priesthood and nobility, making Cyrus's conquest more of a welcome liberation than a hostile takeover. Cyrus's entry into Babylon is the stuff of legend, often depicted as a kind of ancient ticker-tape parade. The Cyrus cylinder, often touted as the first charter of human rights, spins a tale of Cyrus restoring temples, repatriating displaced peoples, and generally being the ancient world's answer to Mother Teresa. While there's truth in these accounts, there's also a generous sprinkling of propaganda. The reality: Cyrus was a shrewd politician who understood the power of image. By respecting local customs and religions, he turned potential foes into allies, a move that was as strategic as it was sincere. His benevolence was a calculated move to stabilize his newly acquired territories, ensuring they were more productive and less rebellious. After all, happy subjects are less likely to revolt and more likely to pay taxes. It's a lesson in leadership that would make Machiavelli proud. Sometimes, a little kindness goes a long way in maintaining power. As Cyrus's empire continued to swell, so did his legend. His ability to balance conquest with clemency was unprecedented. He wielded power like a maestro conducting a symphony, each note carefully chosen to maintain harmony in his vast realm. Yet, the realities of maintaining such an empire were daunting. Roads needed to be built, armies had to be fed, and rebellions, inevitable as rain in the monsoon, had to be quashed. And here's where the myth of Cyrus the Great starts to shimmer with shades of grey. For every tale of mercy, there were undoubtedly harsh realities that don't make the cut in the rosy retrospectives. The roads that stitched his empire together were built on the backs of laborers who didn't have the luxury of saying no. The taxes that filled his coffers came from subjects who might have dreamed of a simpler, freer existence. It's easy to romanticize the past, but the truth is often as gritty as the sand beneath ancient Persian sandals. As Cyrus's empire reached its zenith, he had effectively rewritten the script of conquest. His blend of military prowess, diplomatic savvy, and PR genius created a model for empire building that will be emulated for centuries. But the sands of time are relentless, and history is ever the capricious storyteller. For now, Cyrus stood triumphant, a ruler whose name would echo through the ages, both as a benevolent king and a formidable conqueror. But the story doesn't end here. With an empire so vast and diverse, the challenges of maintaining it were only just beginning. The world was watching, and history was waiting to see if Cyrus's legacy would endure or crumble like so many before. The stage was set for the next chapter of the Achaemenid saga, where the true test of leadership lay not in conquest, but in sustainability. Stay tuned, because the empire-building roller coaster has only just begun its thrilling ascent. As Cyrus the Great basked in his newfound power, the Achaemenid Empire was a sprawling tapestry of cultures, stitched together by the threads of diplomacy, cunning, and the occasional sword. But Cyrus wasn't just playing Risk with real territories. He was rewriting the rules of empire building. Each conquest was a masterclass in strategy and negotiation, where economics and culture were as important as military might. Let's talk about Lydia first. Croesus, the king with a wealth that could make a dragon envious, played right into Cyrus's hands. The Lydian king's fatal flaw, misreading the oracle of Delphi, a classic blunder that turned prophecy into irony. Croesus thought he'd destroy a great empire, and he did. Just not the one he was expecting. It was a costly mistake, the kind that ancient kings couldn't afford. Croesus's riches, including gold reserves that would make Fort Knox blush, now flowed into Persian coffers. The economic implications were staggering. Suddenly, Cyrus had access to the kind of wealth that could fund armies, build infrastructure, and grease the wheels of governance. But money wasn't the only thing Cyrus gained. Lydia was a cultural melting pot, a miniature United Nations of the ancient world, brimming with innovation and trade. By absorbing Lydia, Cyrus wasn't just acquiring land. He was integrating a hub of commerce and creativity into his growing empire. Lydia's strategic position as a gateway to the Aegean meant that Cyrus now had a foot in the door of Greek trade routes, which was like having a backstage pass to the ancient world's economic concert. Cyrus's strategy was as much about hearts and minds as it was about swords and shields. He understood that an empire is built on more than just land. It's built on people. And the best way to keep people happy, let them be themselves. Cyrus's policy of cultural integration was revolutionary. Instead of imposing Persian customs, he respected local traditions, allowing conquered peoples to maintain their religious practices and societal structures. This wasn't just benevolence, it was political genius. Happy subjects are less likely to rebel and more likely to contribute to the empire's prosperity. Now, let's shift our gaze to Babylon. Capturing this ancient metropolis was like winning the historical lottery. Babylon was the crown jewel of the ancient world, a city of untold wealth and cultural significance. Nabonidus, its last king, had managed to alienate just about everyone with a pulse, including the influential priesthood. Enter Cyrus, stage right, with an offer that was hard to refuse. He positioned himself as a liberator rather than a conqueror, a savvy move that ensured the gates of Babylon swung open rather than slammed shut. The economic impact of Babylon's conquest was akin to hitting the jackpot. The city was not just a center of wealth, but a hub of knowledge and culture. By bringing Babylon into the fold, Cyrus tapped into the intellectual and economic capital of the ancient world. The integration of Babylon was a boon for trade, science, and administration, infusing the Persian Empire with new ideas and perspectives. It was a merger, not an acquisition, with benefits that extended far beyond gold and silver. And here's where Cyrus's use of propaganda came into play. He knew that perception was power. The Cyrus Cylinder, often dubbed the first bill of human rights, was a PR masterpiece. It depicted Cyrus as a benevolent ruler who restored temples and repatriated displaced peoples. While there was truth in this portrayal, it was also a carefully crafted narrative designed to win hearts and minds. The reality was that Cyrus was a shrewd politician who understood the value of a good story. By casting himself as a liberator, he neutralized potential resistance and solidified his rule. But let's not get swept away by the romance of it all. The integration of diverse cultures wasn't without its challenges. Maintaining harmony in a vast empire required constant vigilance and deft political maneuvering. The satrapy system was a stroke of genius. Each region had a satrap, or governor, who acted as the king's eyes and ears. This decentralized model allowed for local autonomy while keeping the empire's diverse populations in check. It was a balancing act, akin to juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. And the stakes, the survival of the empire. Cyrus's ability to blend force with diplomacy was unparalleled. He was a maestro, conducting a grand symphony of cultures, economies, and politics. Yet, his success was not without its harsh realities. The roads that connected his empire were built on the backs of laborers, and the taxes that filled his coffers came from subjects who might have preferred a simpler life. The empire, for all its glory, was a demanding machine that required constant feeding. As Cyrus's empire reached new heights, so did the complexity of its administration. The integration of diverse cultures brought both opportunities and challenges. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, and the threat of rebellion was never far away. Cyrus had to navigate these choppy waters with skill, ensuring that his empire remained a cohesive whole. It was a delicate dance, one that required the right mix of carrot and stick. Despite the challenges, Cyrus's legacy was secure. He had redefined what it meant to be an emperor, combining military prowess with diplomatic acumen and a keen understanding of human nature. His empire was a living testament to his vision, a mosaic of cultures united under a single banner. Yet, the story of the Achaemenid Empire was far from over. The challenges of maintaining such a vast and diverse realm were only beginning. The world was watching, and history was waiting to see if Cyrus's creation would stand the test of time or crumble under its own weight. As we leave Cyrus on the brink of his next challenge, it's clear that his empire was not just a feat of conquest, but a triumph of governance. His ability to integrate diverse cultures and manage a sprawling territory was unprecedented. But the road ahead was fraught with peril, and the true test of his legacy was yet to come. Would the empire endure, or would it fall victim to the same forces that had undone so many before? The stage was set for the next act in this epic drama, and the world was waiting with bated breath. Stay tuned, because the saga of Cyrus the Great and the Achaemenid Empire is far from over. As Cyrus the Great gazed out over his vast empire, he knew that holding onto it would require more than just military might and a flair for diplomacy. The Achaemenid Empire was a behemoth, stretching over 3,000 miles from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River. It was a patchwork of cultures, languages, and currencies, a logistical nightmare that would give even the most seasoned project manager a cold sweat. So, how did Cyrus manage to keep this sprawling empire from unraveling faster than a cheaply made toga? With a mix of administrative genius, infrastructural innovation, and a few tricks that would make Machiavelli blush. Cyrus's approach to governance was revolutionary for its time. He didn't just conquer territories, he integrated them. This wasn't the typical my way or the highway kind of rule. Instead, Cyrus opted for a more inclusive style, respecting local customs and allowing a degree of autonomy. It was like he was running an ancient version of a federal system, where provinces, or satrapies, as they were called, had their own governors, or satraps. These satraps were responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining order, and making sure nobody was plotting a coup while the emperor wasn't looking. The satrapy system was a masterstroke of delegation, allowing Cyrus to manage a vast and diverse empire without having to personally micromanage every goat herd and grain silo. By empowering local leaders, he ensured that his empire was not just a collection of conquered lands, but a cohesive unit that could operate smoothly even when he wasn't around to crack the whip. It was like running a franchise, where each satrap had enough autonomy to keep things running locally, but was ultimately accountable to the central authority in Persepolis. Speaking of taxes, let's dive into the economic engine that kept the empire humming. The Achaemenid Empire was a well-oiled machine that ran on tax revenue, and Cyrus knew that a well-fed treasury was the key to maintaining power. However, he was savvy enough to understand that oppressive taxation could lead to rebellion faster than you could say off with his head. So, Cyrus implemented a fair and standardized system of taxation, adjusted according to the wealth and productivity of each region. It was a pragmatic approach, ensuring that the empire's coffers were full without driving the populace to revolt. But collecting taxes wasn't just about filling the imperial piggy bank. It was also about infrastructure. Cyrus understood that an empire of this scale needed roads, lots of roads, and not just any roads, but the kind that could withstand the relentless march of armies, the rumble of trade caravans, and the occasional royal procession. Enter the Royal Road, a marvel of ancient engineering that stretched over 600 miles from Sardes in the west to Susa in the east. This wasn't just a dirt path beaten down by hooves and sandals. It was a meticulously planned and constructed highway, complete with relay stations and fresh horses for couriers. The Royal Road was the internet of its day, allowing for rapid communication and efficient administration across the empire. It was said that a message could travel from one end of the empire to the other in just a week, a feat that would make even the most seasoned FedEx driver envious. But hold your horses, literally. The Royal Road wasn't just for official business. It was a vital artery for trade, connecting diverse regions and allowing goods, ideas, and cultures to flow freely. This wasn't just about economics, it was about integration. By facilitating trade, Cyrus was knitting his empire together, ensuring that each satrapy was not an isolated fiefdom, but a part of a greater whole. It was a lesson in connectivity that still resonates today. An empire, or a nation, is only as strong as its ability to communicate and collaborate. Then there's the legendary Cyrus cylinder, a baked clay artifact often hailed as the world's first charter of human rights. Found in the ruins of Babylon, it tells the story of Cyrus's benevolent rule, his respect for local customs, and his commitment to repatriating displaced peoples. While it's tempting to see the cylinder as a testament to Cyrus's enlightened leadership, it's also important to recognize it for what it was, a piece of ancient propaganda. The cylinder was a public relations coup, designed to portray Cyrus as a liberator rather than a conqueror, a ruler who valued justice over tyranny. It was a narrative that resonated with his subjects, ensuring loyalty and stability in a newly conquered land. But let's not get too misty-eyed. The reality is that Cyrus's benevolence was as much about pragmatism as it was about principle. By respecting local customs and religions, he minimized resistance and maximized productivity. After all, an empire where people feel respected and valued is an empire that's less likely to rebel and more likely to thrive. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required constant vigilance and occasional ruthlessness. For every tale of mercy, there were surely countless instances of harsh enforcement that simply didn't make it into the official record. As the empire expanded, so did the challenges of governance. The Achaemenid administration was a complex web of bureaucracy, with each satrapy acting as a cog in the imperial machine. Communication was key, and the Royal Road was just one part of a larger network that included couriers, messengers, and a primitive form of postal service. It was a system designed for efficiency, ensuring that orders from Persepolis could reach the farthest corners of the empire with minimal delay. But let's not kid ourselves. The system was only as good as the people running it, and corruption was a constant threat. Cyrus had to rely on a network of spies, known as the King's Eyes and Ears, to keep satraps in line and ensure that nobody was getting too ambitious for their own good. Despite these challenges, Cyrus's legacy was secure. He had transformed the Achaemenid Empire into a model of governance, a testament to the power of strategic thinking and cultural integration. His ability to balance conquest with diplomacy, force with benevolence, and central control with local autonomy set a standard that would influence empires for centuries to come. Yet, the story was far from over. The empire was a living entity, constantly evolving and adapting to new challenges. As Cyrus looked toward the future, he knew that the true test of his legacy would not be found in the conquests of the past, but in the sustainability of the present. As we leave Cyrus for now, with the empire at its peak and the world watching, it's clear that his genius lay not just in his ability to conquer, but in his ability to govern. His innovations in administration and infrastructure were not just feats of engineering, but acts of vision, ensuring that the Achaemenid Empire was not just a flash in the pan, but a lasting force in history. But history is a fickle mistress, and the challenges of maintaining such a vast and diverse realm were only beginning. The next chapter in this epic tale would test the limits of Cyrus's creation, as new forces rose to challenge the empire's dominance. Stay tuned, because the saga of Cyrus the Great and his empire is far from over. The tale of Cyrus the Great is like a historical roller coaster, with enough twists and turns to make even the most stoic historian clutch their metaphorical pearls. But as with all rides, eventually you must step off. The time we reach 530 BCE, the end of Cyrus's legendary journey is nigh. And let's be honest, this is where history gets a little fuzzy, like a camera focused on the wrong part of the scene. The narrative of his death is shrouded in as much mystery as myth, setting the stage for a legacy that would outlast empires and inspire ages. Let's tackle the romanticized tales of his demise first. One popular story, straight out of the ancient tabloid equivalent, claims Cyrus met his end at the hands of the Massagetae, a nomadic tribe in Central Asia. According to Herodotus, the Greek historian with a flair for the dramatic, Cyrus fell in battle against their queen, Tamaris, who allegedly had his head dunked in a wineskin filled with blood. Now, it's a vivid image, perfect for a Netflix special, but also a tad too theatrical to swallow whole. What we do know is that Cyrus died in battle, likely in a campaign against these steppe warriors, but the details remain as elusive as a cat on a hot tin roof. Despite the lack of clarity, Cyrus's death had seismic implications. Like any great leader, his passing left a power vacuum the size of a black hole. The empire he meticulously crafted now faced the ultimate test. Could it survive without its charismatic architect? Enter Cambyses Roman II, Cyrus's son, who inherited not just a throne, but a high-stakes game of empire management. Cambyses, however, had a penchant for bold moves and questionable decisions, like his ill-fated campaign in Egypt. If Cyrus was the empire's visionary architect, Cambyses was the guy who tried to turn the blueprint into a reality show. But that's a saga for another day. After Cambyses' reign hit the skids, the empire found itself at a crossroads, a moment of crisis that could have unraveled all of Cyrus's achievements. Enter Darius I, the man who would stabilize and expand what Cyrus had built. Darius wasn't just a stopgap ruler, he was an administrative wonderkind. Under his reign, the Achaemenid Empire didn't just survive, it thrived, becoming the largest of its time. Darius's genius lay in his ability to innovate within the framework Cyrus had established. He improved the satrapy system, standardized weights and measures, and introduced a new currency, the daric, which became the ancient equivalent of a gold-backed dollar. But what about Cyrus's real legacy, beyond the empire and the myths? Let's strip away the romantic veneer and look at the hard truths. Cyrus set a precedent for how to build and maintain an empire that wasn't just a collection of territories, but a cohesive cultural mosaic. His respect for local customs and religions wasn't just a moral high ground, it was strategic brilliance. In today's corporate lingo, Cyrus was a master of buy-in, ensuring his subjects felt invested in the empire's success. This kind of leadership, where respect and pragmatism walk hand in hand, is a masterclass for anyone looking to lead, whether you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company or the head of a PTA. Cyrus also left behind a legacy of infrastructure that went beyond roads and bridges. He laid the groundwork for what would become a global marketplace, linking east and west in a web of trade and cultural exchange. The Royal Road wasn't just a highway. It was an artery through which ideas, goods, and people flowed, fostering innovation and prosperity. It's the kind of legacy that resonates in today's interconnected world, where global supply chains and cultural exchange are the lifeblood of modern economies. Yet, as much as we can admire Cyrus, it's crucial to acknowledge the darker shades of his rule. His empire, like all empires, was built on the backs of countless individuals whose stories didn't make the annals of history. For every grand edict issued by Cyrus, there were surely moments of harsh compliance and enforced loyalty. It's a reminder that history, much like humanity, is complex and layered, full of contradictions and conflicts. In the end, Cyrus the Great left a legacy that transcends the dusty pages of history books. He was a pioneer of governance, a strategist whose insights have stood the test of time. His empire was a testament to what could be achieved through a blend of force, diplomacy, and savvy administration. But above all, Cyrus's story is a reminder of the timeless dance between power and principle, ambition and ethics. It's a narrative that continues to echo through the halls of history, offering lessons for anyone daring enough to lead. So as we put the final touches on this ancient tapestry, let's remember that Cyrus's story is not just about a king who built an empire. It's about the enduring power of vision, the challenges of leadership, and the complex legacy that any ruler, ancient or modern, leaves behind. It's a story that reminds us that while empires may rise and fall, the impact of a visionary leader can echo through the ages, shaping the world in ways both seen and unseen. Whether you're plotting a corporate takeover or just trying to navigate the ups and downs of life, the lessons of Cyrus the Great are as relevant today as they were over 2 millennia ago. In the grand tapestry of Korean history, Empress Myeongseong is the thread that refuses to be ignored, or unraveled quietly, for that matter. Born Min Ya-young in 1851, she was thrust into a world where men dictated the tempo, but she would soon be the one orchestrating the whole symphony. By 1866, she was married off to King Gajong of the Joseon dynasty at the tender age of 15, a political pawn in a game where the rules were as clear as a bowl of kimchi stew. Yet, it didn't take long for her to prove that she was no mere accessory to the throne. She was, instead, an unexpected force of nature, with a knack for politics that even the most seasoned courtiers struggled to match. Her marriage to King Gajong was a tactical move by the Diwangan, Gajong's father, who needed a queen that wouldn't interfere in his affairs, an assumption that was as misguided as putting a cat in charge of a fish market and expecting tranquility. The Diwangan must have thought he was getting a demure bride who'd stay out of the political kitchen, but Myeongseong was more than willing to roll up her sleeves and stir the pot. Within a few years, she had navigated the arcane and often absurd customs of the court to carve out a realm of influence that left her male counterparts scrambling. Now, let's talk about the court, a place where the absurd often joined hands and danced gleefully with the serious. Imagine a stage where the players wear hanboks, but instead of Shakespearean drama, you're getting a high-stakes political opera with a dash of comedy. Court life was a series of carefully choreographed rituals where even the placement of a hat could symbolize a political stance. In this world of pomp and protocol, Empress Myeongseong was the conductor who turned the predictable into a performance worthy of the ages. Her early achievements were nothing short of impressive. She quickly recognized that knowledge was power and began educating herself in statecraft. Her political acumen allowed her to build alliances with reform-minded officials, much to the chagrin of those who underestimated her. She saw the big picture in a way that many of her contemporaries did not, and her ability to anticipate the moves of her opponents was akin to playing a game of baddock with someone who already knew your strategy. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The male-dominated political landscape was a veritable minefield, and Myeongseong had to be nimble to avoid being sidelined. The early days of her reign were marked by power struggles that would make a Game of Thrones plot seem like a sunny picnic. Yet, her wit and shrewdness helped her navigate these treacherous waters. She had the uncanny ability to turn potential adversaries into allies, or at least keep them guessing long enough to maintain her grip on power. One of the more humorous aspects of court life was the obsession with auspicious dates and omens. It was believed that even the most mundane decisions needed the blessing of the stars, and celestial approval was often sought for everything from policy decisions to dinner menus. Myeongseong, however, had little patience for such superstitions when they interfered with her political agenda. While her contemporaries might have been poring over astrology charts, she was busy charting a course for Korea's future. Empress Myeongseong's ability to adapt and thrive in such an environment was nothing short of remarkable. In a time when women were rarely seen as political players, she was a masterful puppeteer, pulling the strings behind the scenes. Her early achievements laid the groundwork for her later endeavors, and she became a beacon for change and modernization in a kingdom that was often reluctant to step out of its comfort zone. Her rise to power was not without its critics. Many of her decisions were met with skepticism by those who clung to the old ways, and she faced constant pressure from conservative elements within the court. However, she used her position to push for reforms that would benefit the kingdom, advocating for modernization in an era when Korea was grappling with the encroaching influence of Western powers. Her initiatives in education and her support for the introduction of new technologies were revolutionary for the time. They demonstrated her forward-thinking vision for the nation's future. Her story is a testament to the power of resilience and intelligence in the face of overwhelming odds. Empress Myeongseong may have started as a political pawn, but she emerged as a queen who mastered the game. Her early achievements were just the beginning of a legacy that would leave an indelible mark on Korean history, a legacy that continues to inspire those who learn of her life and times. So, the next time you hear about a queen who conquered not with swords, but with strategy, remember Myeongseong, the empress who played the court like a maestro and left the world a symphony of change. So, let's delve deeper into Empress Myeongseong's ventures into reform, a journey that was as much about navigating the treacherous waters of court politics as it was about steering Korea towards a modern horizon. If you thought she was just going to sit pretty and wave from the palace window, think again. Myeongseong was not one to lounge idly while the world turned. Her vision for Korea was bold, and she wasn't afraid to clash with the old guard to make it a reality. First on her reform agenda was education. In 1886, Myeongseong championed the establishment of the first modern school, Yuha Haktae, an institution that would grow into today's Yuha Women's University. Picture this, a time when the prevailing wisdom was that a woman's place was in the home, yet here was a school dedicated to educating girls. It was like introducing a rock concert in the middle of a classical music festival, both revolutionary and slightly scandalous. This wasn't just about teaching young women to read and write. It was about empowering them with the tools to think, to lead, and maybe, just maybe, to challenge the status quo. But of course, not everyone was clapping along to her symphony of change. The conservative factions at the court were about as thrilled with her reforms as a cat being tossed into a bath. To them, Myeongseong's ideas were anathema, threatening the tried and true traditions they held dear. They argued, quite passionately, that Korea risked losing its cultural identity by embracing these foreign concepts. Yet the Empress was not deterred. Like a seasoned chess player, she was always a few moves ahead, knowing that the path to modernity was littered with the debris of outdated thinking. Her reforms didn't stop at education. Myeongseong also set her sights on the economy, recognizing that Korea's future prosperity depended on modernization. She encouraged the introduction of new technologies and industries, much to the chagrin of those who were content with their ox plows and spinning wheels. Under her watch, the government began to invest in infrastructure projects, including railroads and telegraph lines, which were as revolutionary to the Joseon dynasty as smartphones are to us today. Imagine the shock of sending a message across the country in minutes instead of days. It was the 19th century equivalent of a viral tweet. Yet, modernizing an economy wasn't just about laying tracks and stringing wires. Myeongseong understood that Korea needed to compete on the global stage. She pushed for reforms in trade policies, opening up new markets and encouraging foreign investment. This was a double-edged sword, of course. On one hand, it brought much-needed capital and technology to Korea. On the other, it made the kingdom vulnerable to external influences and pressures. Myeongseong walked this tightrope with the skill of a seasoned acrobat, balancing tradition and innovation with each cautious step. Her reforms were not just about grand gestures. They were grounded in practical realities. Take the postal system, for instance. Myeongseong recognized the importance of communication in governance and commerce. She supported the establishment of a national postal service, which by 1884 was up and running. This was no small feat, considering the logistical challenges of coordinating deliveries across a rugged landscape without the aid of Google Maps. The postal service was a tangible symbol of connection, knitting together a nation that was often fragmented by geography and politics. In the realm of diplomacy, Myeongseong was equally astute. She understood that Korea could not exist in isolation. especially with the looming presence of imperial powers like Japan and Russia. Her approach to foreign relations was both pragmatic and visionary. She fostered alliances with Western nations, not out of a starry-eyed admiration for all things foreign, but from a strategic understanding of balance and power. By cultivating these relationships, she hoped to counterbalance the influence of neighboring Japan, whose imperial ambitions were becoming increasingly apparent. But let's not romanticize Myeongseong as an unerring visionary. Her efforts were fraught with challenges and often met with fierce resistance. The old guard viewed her reforms with suspicion, fearing the erosion of their power and influence. These were the same folks who would have preferred to light their homes with candles rather than embrace electric bulbs, clinging to the familiar like a security blanket. Yet, the Empress pressed on, driven by a belief that Korea's survival depended on its ability to adapt and evolve. Myeongseong's story is not just one of triumph, but also of the relentless push and pull between progress and tradition. She was a woman ahead of her time, caught in a tug-of-war between old customs and new ideas. Her attempts to blend these worlds were both bold and precarious, like mixing oil and water and hoping for a cocktail. But perhaps that's what makes her legacy so compelling. She didn't back down in the face of adversity. She faced it head-on, with a determination that was as unyielding as the mountains of her homeland. As we continue to unravel her story, remember that the dance between past and present is one we all engage in. Myeongseong's reforms were not just about changing policies, they were about changing mindsets. And in a world where the only constant is change, her efforts remind us that progress often comes at a cost, but it's a price worth paying for a brighter future. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll explore how her legacy continued to unfold, leaving an indelible mark on Korea's history. So, as we dive into the swirling waters of Empress Myeongseong's diplomatic escapades, grab your life jacket, because we're heading straight into the geopolitical whirlpool that was late 19th century East Asia. This was a time when Korea found itself in a precarious position, much like a small boat caught between two battling sea monsters, Japan and China, each eager to claim the Korean peninsula as their own personal chess piece. And trust me, the stakes were higher than a kite at a cherry blossom festival. Now, you might be thinking, how does one woman counterbalance the ambitions of two burgeoning empires? Well, she didn't have a magic wand or a genie in a lamp, but she did have a mind as sharp as a sword. Myeongseong saw the writing on the wall, or perhaps the calligraphy on the scroll, and knew that Korea needed strong allies to navigate these turbulent times. Enter Russia, stage left, with its own imperial ambitions and a penchant for vodka-fueled diplomacy. The diplomatic dance with Russia wasn't just a waltz. It was more of a tango, full of dramatic twists and strategic dips. Myeongseong's strategy was to court Russian support as a counterweight to Japan's growing influence. This wasn't just a shot in the dark. By 1895, she had orchestrated a series of meetings and correspondences that would impress even the most seasoned of today's political spin doctors. She worked to secure Russian military advisors, and in a move that would make any chess grandmaster proud, negotiated for Russian soldiers to be stationed in Korea as a deterrent to Japanese aggression. But hold on. Before we start painting Myeongseong as a master puppeteer pulling the strings of international politics with ease, let's inject a dose of reality. The notion of her wielding unchallenged diplomatic power is a bit of an overstatement. Sure, she was a skilled negotiator, but the geopolitical landscape was a minefield, and her steps were as cautious as a cat on a hot tin roof. Her alliances with Russia were controversial and sparked significant backlash, both at home and abroad. Critics argued that she was playing with fire, risking Korea's sovereignty by inviting another imperial power into their backyard. And let's not forget the economic context. Korea wasn't exactly flush with cash during this period. The cost of modernization, coupled with military tensions, meant that the treasury was tighter than a drum. Empress Myeongseong had to juggle these economic constraints while trying to maintain a semblance of balance in her foreign policy. It was like trying to pay off student loans while planning a lavish wedding, an exercise in creative budgeting, to say the least. Her attempts to secure Russian support weren't just about military might, they were about survival. Japan, with its Meiji Restoration in full swing, was undergoing rapid modernization and harbored ambitions to expand its influence throughout Asia. The First Sino-Japanese War of 1894-1895 had already demonstrated Japan's military prowess, leaving China licking its wounds and Korea in an even more precarious position. Myeongseong needed a powerful ally to ensure that Korea didn't become Japan's next acquisition. Despite her efforts, the results were a mixed bag. Russia's support offered a temporary check against Japanese advances, but also brought new challenges. The increased Russian presence was viewed with suspicion by many Koreans, who feared trading one imperial yoke for another. Moreover, the diplomatic balancing act was as delicate as a porcelain teacup on a wobbly table, and one false move could, and did, lead to disaster. The myth of Myeongseong as the infallible diplomatic genius is tempting to believe, but it glosses over the harsh reality she faced. Her maneuvers were bold, and at times visionary, but they were also fraught with miscalculations and unintended consequences. The Empress found herself caught in a web of intrigue, with rival factions within Korea vying for power and external pressures mounting by the day. In this high-stakes game of international poker, Myeongseong was dealt a difficult hand. Her alliances with Russia came at a cost, and the backlash was swift. Pro-Japanese factions within Korea accused her of selling out the nation, while conservative elements saw her as a destabilizing force. They argued that her reliance on foreign powers threatened Korea's independence, and their discontent eventually boiled over into outright hostility. The tragic climax of Myeongseong's diplomatic efforts came on October 8, 1895, when she was assassinated by Japanese agents and Korean collaborators in a brutal coup d'etat. It was a cold, calculated move by her enemies, designed to eliminate the one figure who stood in the way of their ambitions. Her death sent shockwaves throughout Korea and the world, and it marked a turning point in the nation's history. The mythologizing of her diplomatic prowess often overlooks the complexity of her situation. Myeongseong was not a superhero with the power to single-handedly alter the course of history. She was a savvy, determined leader trying to navigate a landscape where the lines between friend and foe were blurred, and every decision carried the weight of potential disaster. In the end, Myeongseong's legacy is one of both triumph and tragedy. Her efforts to secure Korea's sovereignty through strategic alliances were groundbreaking, yet they also highlighted the limitations of her power in the face of overwhelming forces. Her story is a reminder that history is rarely black and white, and the line between heroism and folly is often razor-thin. As we continue to peel back the layers of her life, remember that Empress Myeongseong was a woman of her time, navigating a world that was as unpredictable as it was unforgiving. Her story is one of resilience and resourcefulness, a testament to the power of diplomacy in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. And while her efforts did not always yield the desired results, they left an indelible mark on Korea's history and serve as a poignant reminder of the complexities of leadership in a world on the brink of change. So, Empress Myeongseong's assassination, a moment that slammed history like a thunderclap on a clear day, wasn't just the climax of a single life, but a seismic shift in Korea's fate. Let's unpack how the dominoes fell, one by one, leading to that fateful day in October 1895, when palace intrigue turned bloody and left a nation reeling. Now, don't get me wrong, the Empress wasn't exactly a saint, nor was she a sinister puppet master. She was a complex figure, strategic, yes, but also caught in a web of alliances and enmities that would make any soap opera script look tame. The political atmosphere leading up to her assassination was charged, like a summer storm waiting to break. Let's talk economics, because money, as they say, makes the world go round, or in this case, makes it spin out of control. By the 1890s, Korea was strapped for cash. Modernizing a nation doesn't come cheap, and Myeongseong's initiatives in railways, telegraphs, and education had left the treasury tighter than a drum. Add to that the cost of courting foreign powers like Russia for military and economic support, and you had a fiscal scenario more precarious than a tightrope walker over the Han River. Meanwhile, Japan was eyeing Korea like a hawk spotting its next meal. Having emerged victorious from the First Sino-Japanese War, Japan was keen to expand its influence. Korea was the plum ripe for the picking, and Myeongseong, a fly in their imperial ointment, was the obstacle they decided needed removing. Her alliances with Russia were seen as a direct threat to Japanese interests, and let's be honest, Japan wasn't in the mood for sharing. Enter Mira Goro, Japan's resident minister in Korea, whose idea of diplomacy was about as delicate as a bull in a china shop. To Miura and his co-conspirators, the Empress was a real thorn in the side, a thorn that needed plucking. The plan to assassinate her was hatched with chilling precision, like a military operation rather than a crime. On the morning of October 8, 1895, a group of Japanese agents and Korean collaborators stormed the Gyeongbokgung Palace. They were like a pack of wolves descending upon a lone sheep, driven by a grim resolve to extinguish the Empress's influence once and for all. The assassination was brutal, a grim testament to the lengths people will go to silence opposition. Myeongseong was murdered in her private quarters, her body reportedly burned to hide the evidence, a macabre finale to a life that had burned so brightly. This wasn't just an assassination, it was a statement, a chilling reminder of the stakes in the power game. The aftermath of her death was chaos wrapped in turmoil. King Gajong, her husband, was left in a precarious position, his authority undermined, and his grief palpable. The court, already a hotbed of intrigue and betrayal, was now a powder keg waiting for the slightest spark. The assassination was the catalyst for the Yulmi incident, a period of intense political upheaval where pro-Japanese factions gained the upper hand, pushing Korea closer to Japan's sphere of influence. The whole affair was as messy as a toddler with finger paints, except the stains left behind were on the fabric of a nation. Internationally, the reaction was one of outrage, but also a stark realization of the power dynamics at play. The world took note, yet the immediate repercussions were limited, proof, perhaps, that realpolitik often trumps morality. For Japan, the assassination was a calculated risk, a gambit that brought them closer to dominating Korea, but also one that tainted their reputation, leaving a stain that history would not easily wash away. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. The myth of Myeongseong as a martyr isn't without its kernels of truth. Her assassination did galvanize resistance against Japanese occupation, sparking nationalist fervor that would smolder for decades. She became a symbol of Korean sovereignty, her death a rallying cry for those who would continue the fight for independence. Yet, the romanticism of her legacy often overlooks the complexity of her life. She was not a flawless hero, but a human navigating the treacherous waters of power, ambition, and survival. The stark reality is that Myeongseong's assassination was as much about the absurdity of imperial ambitions as it was about personal vendettas. It was a microcosm of the geopolitical tensions that plagued East Asia at the time. And while her death was a tragedy, it was also a grim reminder of the ruthless calculus that often underpins international politics, a world where ideals are sacrificed on the altar of expedience, and where leaders walk a perilous tightrope between vision and vulnerability. As we unravel the threads of her story, remember that history isn't just a series of dates and events. It's a tapestry of human emotion, ambition, and folly. The tale of Empress Myeongseong is one of resilience and tragedy, a poignant reflection of a world grappling with change. And while her life was cut short, her legacy endures, a testament to the enduring struggle for sovereignty and self-determination in the face of overwhelming odds. The political landscape in the wake of her assassination was as volatile as a chemical reaction gone wrong. Her death didn't just leave a power vacuum. It opened the floodgates for a tidal wave of change that would eventually lead to Korea's annexation by Japan in 1910. The Empress's assassination was a pivotal moment, one that underscored the fragility of power and the perils of geopolitical gamesmanship. In the years that followed, Korea's sovereignty would be eroded, piece by piece, until it was subsumed under Japanese rule. The empire that Myeongseong had fought so hard to modernize was now under foreign control, a bitter irony that underscores the capriciousness of history. Yet, her legacy lived on in the hearts of those who remembered her as a symbol of resistance, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can endure, can fight, and can inspire future generations. So, as we continue to delve deeper into the annals of history, let's keep in mind that the Empress's story is not just a tale of power and politics. It's a narrative of human resilience, of the struggle for dignity and autonomy in a world often indifferent to both. Her life and death are a testament to the complexities of leadership in a turbulent era, a reminder that history is not just made by the victors, but also by those who dare to challenge the status quo. And while Empress Myeongseong's reign ended in tragedy, her story remains a powerful testament to the enduring struggle for independence and the relentless pursuit of progress amid adversity. Her life may have been a symphony cut short, but its echoes continue to resonate, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming challenges, the courage to stand firm can leave a lasting legacy. Stay tuned, because the story doesn't end here. We're far from wrapping up this historical roller coaster ride, and there's more to explore in the life and legacy of Korea's last empress. And so, the roller coaster ride through history brings us to the enduring legacy of Empress Myeongseong, a woman whose life and death have echoed through the annals of time with a resonance that's as compelling as it is complex. Her influence is like that catchy tune you can't get out of your head, remarkably persistent and impossible to ignore. But what does her legacy look like in the Korea of today? Let's unravel the threads and see how the Empress is remembered in modern Korea, where her story has been both revered and reimagined. First off, let's talk about Myeongseong's portrayal in popular culture. You can't swing a proverbial cat in Korea without hitting a piece of media inspired by her life. From the small screen to the big stage, her story has been dramatized and romanticized with a flair that would make Shakespeare himself envious. The 2001 musical, The Last Empress, is a prime example. It's a dazzling spectacle that portrays her as a tragic heroine, a beacon of resistance against the forces of imperialism. The musical has toured internationally, captivating audiences from Seoul to New York with its lush costumes and sweeping score. But like any good drama, it's not all about historical accuracy. The magic of theater, where reality takes a backseat and the audience is swept away by the romance of it all. The musical paints Myeongseong as a martyr, her assassination portrayed with the kind of melodrama that would make daytime soap operas look like documentary films. And while it's tempting to get lost in the grandeur of her myth, it's important to remember that the real story is less about a tragic martyrdom and more about a woman who, against all odds, wielded power in a world that rarely allowed it. In the world of television, Myeongseong's tale has been adapted into numerous dramas, each adding its own spin on her legacy. These portrayals often highlight her intelligence, her political acumen, and her unwavering determination. Yet they also gloss over her more controversial decisions, like her alliances with foreign powers, which were as much about survival as they were about sovereignty. But hey, who needs nuance when you can have a dramatic showdown between good and evil, complete with sweeping camera angles and intense background scores, right? Beyond the stage and screen, Myeongseong's legacy is alive in the very fabric of Korean society. Yuha Women's University, the institution she helped establish, stands as a testament to her commitment to education and empowerment. Today, it's one of the most prestigious universities in Korea, educating thousands of women each year and proving that her vision for modern Korea was not just a pipe dream, but a foundation for the future. If there's a more tangible legacy of her efforts to modernize Korea, it's hard to find. But let's not get too swept up in the fairy tale. History isn't just a collection of feel-good stories. It's a nuanced tapestry of triumphs and tragedies. Myeongseong's legacy is no exception. While she is celebrated as a symbol of resistance and empowerment, her actual reign was fraught with challenges. Her efforts to modernize Korea were met with fierce resistance from conservative factions who saw her as a threat to their power. Her alliances with foreign powers were a double-edged sword, bringing both technological advancements and the risk of foreign entanglement. The romanticized narrative of her life often overshadows the harsh reality she faced. The truth is, Myeongseong was not a mythical figure with superhuman abilities. She was a savvy, determined leader navigating a world that was as dangerous as it was dynamic. Her story is a reminder that history is not black and white, but a complex interplay of ambition, power, and survival. Economically, her legacy is equally complex. The modernization efforts she championed laid the groundwork for Korea's economic development, but they also strained the nation's finances. By opening Korea to foreign trade and investment, she helped set the stage for future growth. Yet these same policies made Korea vulnerable to external pressures. It's a bit like investing in the latest tech stock, potentially lucrative but incredibly risky. Politically, Myeongseong's legacy is a testament to the enduring struggle for Korean sovereignty. Her assassination and the subsequent annexation of Korea by Japan in 1910 highlight the precarious nature of power in a world dominated by imperial ambitions. Yet, her story also serves as a rallying cry for those who would continue the fight for independence, inspiring future generations to challenge oppression and strive for self-determination. So, what do we make of Empress Myeongseong today? She is both a symbol and a cautionary tale, a reminder of the power of resilience and the perils of unchecked ambition. Her life and legacy are a testament to the complexities of leadership in a turbulent era, a time when the stakes were as high as they were unpredictable. In the end, Myeongseong's story is less about the myths that surround her and more about the reality she navigated. She was a woman who dared to dream of a modern Korea, who faced opposition with an iron will, and who left an indelible mark on history despite the challenges she faced. Her legacy is a testament to the power of vision and the enduring struggle for progress in the face of adversity. As we wrap up this historical journey, let's remember that the past is never just a series of dates and events. It's a living, breathing narrative of human ambition, resilience, and folly. Empress Myeongseong's life may have been cut short, but her story continues to resonate, a powerful reminder of the complexities of history and the enduring spirit of those who dare to challenge the status quo. So, as you ponder the legacy of Korea's last empress, remember that history isn't just written by the victors. It's shaped by those who refuse to accept defeat. And in that refusal, we find the true power of legacy.